Whoa, extreme close up. Hey, we don't like that. Need to make that smaller. Oh, that's better. Ooh, load. Morning all. How's everyone doing? Good morning, good morning, good morning. How's it going? Good to see you all in the house. 28 already, which is fantastic. Another kind of last minute planned, well, semi-planned live stream, I should say. But here we are, man. I'm glad to be here. Someone sent me this video that I'm going to react to. It's called What Race Were the Ancient Egyptians? And someone sent it to me a little while ago, and I wasn't going to react to it initially. And then I thought, you know what, why not? Let's do it. So shout out to you. Someone sent it to me on Instagram. I can't remember exactly what your name is. But if I find it on my phone, maybe I'll give you a big up before the end. But shout out to you. Obviously, a lot of the content that someone said, well, Wildflower just said not this again. And I know it's a, you can see why I didn't want to do it. But at the same time, I think if you can keep it in a sensible place, if you can keep the discussion in a sensible place and not take it personally. And also, I do try to be more empathetic now when the reason I'm responding to this one, in short, is because I only respond to people who I don't feel are being polemic, argumentative, and actually who maybe are approaching the subject from a place of naivety, as opposed to people who clearly have an agenda, and people who just want to fight and just want to argue and just want to be nasty. I don't deal with any of those. I'll ignore those kind of people. But people who actually maybe are just making an error, because essentially we've all been born into this world where misinformation is king and lies have been taught to us from young. People do genuinely believe things, and they blindly believe them because they haven't heard an alternative. And to a lot of people, Black Egypt is synonymous with, bloodletting. Or I'm trying to think of some random wild kind of like outdated science that doesn't have anything to back it. But to a lot of people, they think that people who talk about ancient Egypt being an African society, they think they're crazy, but they don't realize how crazy that they are for not believing that Egypt was an African society. We've all been conditioned, we've all been lied to. And the reason I'm patient as well, let me add to that argument, the reason I'm patient as well is because I don't only tackle Black Egypt, I cover other societies that I know were Black or had substantial Black input, and people even within this community will attack me for it. They'll say, oh, why are you talking about that? There were no Black people in Europe. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, there was a load of them. And so I can't, when you learn to be patient and you learn to be kind of understanding where people are coming from, I think you gain more ground. So I'm not going to attack this person because I kind of empathize slightly with their false viewpoint, but hopefully we can address some of the points that he's made and steer him correctly and maybe even change his mind. Obviously I had that big back and forth with Metatron, and as much as it was a waste of time, it also it highlighted this topic to a lot of people who weren't aware of the arguments that we make on our side and how strong they are. And I actually think that he changed his mind. I know he's still a very polemic character to most people. Understandably, most people find him very jarring, but we argue our points using an academic approach, not a personal approach, because when you have the weight of evidence on your side, you find you don't need to, it's really easy. I find it easy to have these discussions because the weight of evidence is greatly on our side, because what we're providing is the truth. And I think sometimes people think by attacking us, they're doing what is true, but they haven't seen the evidence. And then they realize, hey, the thing that I believe actually has no evidence. Massive shout out to Seth Faxon for a $5 donation already. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. He said we need all the pro-Black responses we can get. someone may have not heard your explanation yet. I agree. And it's not even my explanation, it's just the explanation, isn't it? It's the preponderance of evidence that's already out there that people need to talk about. So I guess it's healthy to revisit the discussion and argument every now and then, but I guess not to be so absorbed with it and not to be so kind of focused on that one debate that you don't do anything else. And I feel like that's where the error is made. When people do nothing but argue about the race of the Egyptians, that gets very, very boring. I get bored of that very, very soon. I try to move on and tackle loads of other subjects. Cultural continuity, I find that discussion much more interesting, looking at different various cultures of Africa and how they align with ancient Nile Valley civilizations, other civilizations, looking at other parts of the world that have black populations that aren't quote unquote African. Those things really interest me as well, you know. So thank you. Massive thank you as well to Crenshaw Grinder, $10. Thank you very much. He said, do you think people with multiracial argument are more dangerous than the outright delusional Euro Levantine centrics? I think it depends where they're coming from. Because you get the modern Egyptians who use the multiracial argument, but they deliberately obfuscate terms and words. So they'll say, oh, the ancient Egyptians were black, they were Egyptian. And then when they come across an indisputable black Egyptian, they'll be like, well, he's Egyptian, he's not sub-Saharan. And then they keep moving. Those, a lot of them, the E for E crowd, you know who they are, the Egypt for Egyptians crowd, a lot of them, they're just, you know, you can't discuss with them. They're dogmatic, you know. There's nothing academic about their argument. It's just pure passion and bile and anger and emotion, but without any kind of like academic support for anything that they say. So you just ignore them. I think they're very dangerous. But then I think there's a bunch of people who believe the ancient Egyptians are like the modern Egyptians, but that's because it's been programmed growing up watching Aladdin and Alibaba and all these kind of like shows that just kind of like conflated the entire modern Middle East with the ancient, you know. Even like I even think about things like Sinbad growing up and stuff like that. It really just whitened that whole part of the world and then just crush it in with Egypt and make it all one. And most people are just ignorant. So that's kind of my viewpoint. But I still think there's hope for a lot of people, because it's just like any argument that's new. A lot of conspiracy theories that people have and they go, oh, it's conspiracy theory. But then when you explain things to people who haven't looked into it yet and they understand afterwards, oh no, actually it's me that believes in the conspiracy theory. It's not you. You guys have all the evidence. And as you guys know, we have all the evidence. All of the evidence backs us. We don't have to bend our argument into shapes and, bend ourselves into pretzels trying to make Egypt black. It's an African civilization, and they are like the modern people of Africa. So let me extend that thought, because I don't like to argue that the ancient Egyptians were black. I don't like to make that argument, because that argument is too easy for people to spin. Let me illustrate this really quickly, actually, because this is quite important. I'm just going to illustrate that point so you know what I'm talking about. Bear with me, this will take 1 second. What did I do there? Okay, let's move there. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to present. So this will take literally a few seconds. Share screen. That one there. Turn that on and share. Boom. Okay, cool. I want to give a quick shout out. Thank you very much, Macy, member for 8 months. Says you can't make arguments by looking at current phenotypes and assume they look the same as the original populations. Of course not. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's called presentism. And that's a lot of people. It's really funny. A lot of people make presentism arguments, but they precede their presentism arguments by talking about all the migration that's taken place and then act like that migration has made no difference historically. So it's like what you'll find is people who make these arguments constantly contradict themselves. And the only people who don't contradict ourselves is us. We don't contradict ourselves. Our arguments are not flawed. And the point I was making earlier, or at least the point I wanted to make, was that I don't argue that the ancient, sorry, I was trying to get rid of the comments there. I don't argue that the ancient Egyptians are black. Okay. And just to be clear about that, yeah. I don't argue that the ancient Egyptians are black. What I argue is that the ancient Egyptians are like the modern populations of Africa that are situated in and around the Nile. Obviously not in the delta region of the Nile, the northern part of the Nile, but the rest of the Nile. Okay. The modern populations of the ancient populations of Egypt are like the modern populations of Africa. Okay. That's a much easier argument to make than using the word black. Okay. Because I'm just like, just look down the Nile. Look at the Nubians, look at the Dinka, look at the Rwandans, look at the Ugandans, look at the Ethiopians, look at the Somali, like all of these. You don't have to extend much further than that. Now, did their phenotypes exceed out of these areas as well? Yes, but for the sake of simplicity, it's much easier for me to just say, look down the Nile right now, because those populations will give you pretty much all of the phenotypes that you need. And then you move it away from being a binary racial argument, which is what they like, because they like to confuse these four words that I've put on the screen. So when you say, oh, the ancient Egyptians were black, they say, oh, well, the ancient Egyptians were dark, they weren't black. And then when you say, oh, well, the ancient Egyptians were dark, oh, what about this light-skinned one? And then you go, well, light-skinned people can be black still. And they go, well, and then you go, well, the ancient Egyptians were African. And they go, well, they weren't sub-Saharan. And they constantly jump around these four phrases. Have you noticed that? So when you prove that they're one, they say, oh, well, they're dark, just like this is what Zahir says. Yes, they were dark, but they're not Negro. Yeah, they're not Negro. What he means is that they were this, but because you can't because they're not located in the south of the Sahara, they're not sub-Saharan, which is a circular argument. You know what I mean? Well, they're not sub-Saharan. Well, of course they weren't sub-Saharan, because Egypt is not south of the Sahara. So no logical person is going to argue that they're sub-Saharan. We're arguing that they're phenotypically black. So they'll move these things around. So the easiest way I get out of that is I say the ancient Egyptians are like the modern Africans. Okay. And then that includes all of that variety. That includes defeats the location argument. It defeats everything. Okay. And then the onus is on you to then disprove that the ancient Egyptians, the logical argument that the ancient Egyptians are like the population of the Nile. You have to now disprove that, you know. So that's when the ball is literally in their court. Okay, let's move that off screen. Escape. I'm going to fire up the video now, and I'm going to let it play for a bit while I organize myself. And then when I'm finished organizing myself, I'll go back and I'll play and stop it. So I'm going to let you see some of this video, okay, without me interrupting, which actually that will really please some of you, because I get some really mean comments from people. You talk too much. So I'm going to let this play for a little bit, which will allow me some time to organize myself, and then we'll get going. Okay, so let me change the view actually, because I don't like it making the video too big, because then I get problems with there. So there you go. That's not too big now. All right, so I'm going to play. Let me all know. Just type a 1 when it starts playing to just let me know that you can hear it, okay?
So it seems like at least once a year, this popular discussion arises over what race the ancient Egyptians were, or perhaps more accurately, what skin color they were. Most people seem to be able to comprehend the fact that ancient Egypt, in the ancient world and in the modern world, is a land bridge between people.
Okay, great. So I know that everyone can hear it now. So like I said, I'm going to let it play for a little while whilst I'm doing some bits and bobs in the back. And yeah, then we'll get back to it.
People living in the Near East and people living in Saharan Africa. So over thousands of years, you have people with orange skin meeting people with darker brown skin. And what do they produce? Well, they produce children with skin colors varying from each side of the scale. Every so often, you have distant traders from the greater Mediterranean arriving by boat and deciding to stay, making the pool of skin colors marginally paler in some areas of Egypt. Most people can comprehend this. But another popular argument is that the ancient Egyptians must have been an entirely dark-skinned civilization, which isn't even supported by the statuary work seen in the Old Kingdom, where rulers have this burnt orange skin color. And then something really bizarre I saw last week was someone claiming that the Egyptians could have been white.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the man?
Anyway, I think it's time to set the record straight on who the ancient Egyptians were, where they came from, and how many times their racial composition changed during their ancient history. And at the end of this video, I think that you'll have a pretty good understanding of how vast, diverse, and complicated ancient Egypt's history really is. So we have evidence of people living in Egypt as far back as 1 million years ago. This vast era marks what we call the Paleolithic period, spanning from around 1 million years ago to around 7,000 years ago, or 5000 BC. During this long period, sites like el Ka'ab, Nag Ahmed, Bar el Ha'ar, the Dakhla Oasis, and the Fayum were inhabited primarily by Homo erectus and early Homo sapiens, who were arriving in Egypt and attempting to adapt and overcome specific challenges of surviving in this environment. Now, this was many, many thousands of years before the pharaohs. And these Egyptians lived a vastly different life than what we imagine life in ancient Egypt to have been like. While they did mostly live along the Nile River, these were semi-nomadic people, hunter-gatherer groups who seem to have never settled in one spot for too long. Although multiple waves of hunter-gatherers separated by thousands of years seem to have chosen many of the same locations to settle down, at least temporarily. As far as we know, these people didn't build shelters substantially enough to survive tens or hundreds of thousands of years later. If they weren't living in huts, they may have had local caves to take refuge in. And in fact, in 1933, the Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi discovered a Paleolithic site in the farthest reaching western deserts of Egypt. Now, this site, known as the Cave of Swimmers, dates back about 10,000 years and is famous for its cave art depicting figures with their legs bent and stretched out as if they were swimming. Now, why is there a...
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. I'm sure you guys were enjoying that. And I'm going to bring it back and we're going to start to go through point by point. I just needed a bit of time to kind of organize just the slide that I wanted to show you really quickly there. So I'm going to, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly pop on the screen this map, because I think it's really important that people really comprehend what topography is always quite useful for us to look at. Yeah, let's look at things. Let's look at how big things are, what things actually look like, so we can kind of start to get an idea about what is going on. All right, because I think if we do this, this will be quite useful for people to kind of like put things in perspective. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to just consider Africa in modern times. Okay, we're going to consider Africa in modern times. All right, now on the left hand side you can see a map of Africa, and you can see clearly highlighted the Nile. I hope you can all see that in this kind of like central image. In fact, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Let me do that. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Boom, boom, boom. Let's do this. There we go. Brilliant. So you can see the Nile here. And all I'm going to say is, even in modern times, the first cataract of the Nile is around here. Okay, so you can see where I've highlighted in red. So even in modern times, so south of the first cataract, you get Nubia. And actually, even above Nubia, you kind of get the Saidi population. So I could move this up, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to keep it down here. Even in modern times, this entire region of the Nile, so I'm sure you guys would argue that's about 80 to 85% of the Nile is inhabited by Black people. People who we'd indisputably call Black, because obviously south of the Nubians, we have Sudan region, we have the South Sudanese, we have the Ugandans, we have Ethiopia over here, this branch of the Nile. Carry on down the White Nile, we move into Rwanda, Lake Tanganyika. This is a black river. Okay, now that sounds obvious to everyone because the Nile is in Africa, but it's really important to put those things in perspective. In fact, let's continue putting some things in perspective. I could draw a line because everyone's like, well, North Africa's black, North Africa's white, North Africa's white. Well, let's first of all consider that all of these nations, Mali, sorry, let me just zoom in so everyone can see that. Mali, Niger, Chad, Mauritania, all of these nations are definitely black, okay? And not only all of those nations are black, let's actually consider that the bottom half of most of these North African nations, it's getting less and less because they're committing genocide in a lot of these North African nations, unfortunately. But if you're looking at the south of Libya, you have your Tebu population. South of, in fact, most of Morocco is mixed. Okay, south of Algeria still has a very large amount of the Tuareg population living there, Haratins. Most of these nations are split pretty much down the middle between their kind of like, not even down the middle, I'd say they're quite mixed throughout. But North Africa has a massive black population. So what you see here is that even in modern times, okay, even in modern times, what we have is an Africa that is largely black, okay? We have a Sahara that is almost entirely black. We have a Sahel region that is definitely entirely black. We have a Guinea belt over here, which is definitely entirely black. And obviously this is Africa, okay? Africa is what you would classify as a black nation. Now, they will try to tell you that only down here is black. But you can see, even by observing it, that is observably untrue. Okay. Mostly this entire continent is black, with a small region that's around the coast of the Mediterranean that has now essentially been overrun by people who are not fully black, people who are mixed, and some people who, very small pockets of white populations, but mostly people who are mixed and people who are kind of like hybridized with high percentages of foreign blood. Okay, that's what's happened on the African continent. If you look to the right hand side, which I haven't drawn in here again, once again, we could say south of Luxor. I did say as one, but we could say south of Luxor, we have your Saidi, your Nubians, everything down here, okay, is populated by what we would classify as black Africans. That's modern day, not even historically, modern day. So it's really important that we fathom that when we have these discussions, have a zoom out and look even at in modern times. That's the way these places are populated. The Nile is a river populated by native Africans. Okay, now let's get into this video because I think we did want to give it attention, each of the arguments now. So we're going to go through, we're going to let him play, and I'm obviously going to play and pause, and we'll have a little discussion when things come up that are basically incorrect. So let's go from there.
So it seems like at least once a year, this popular discussion arises over what race the ancient Egyptians were.
I mean, even that image there, that image belies him. Okay, straight away, this image here belies him. You can see that deepness of brown, and I'm just going to say this very quickly before I move on. No one can achieve this color, this deepness of brown that we can see here, unless they are a member of a local native African race. This is not something you can achieve. And bear in mind, most/all ancient Egyptian artwork is slightly faded, but even faded, the deepness of that brown is not something that you can achieve with a tan. This is a deep brown that is native to Africa. Okay. Now, I haven't double checked to see whether or not this image itself is an original or facsimile. So I'd have to check that. But even bearing that in mind, that color is not something that you can achieve. This is how you would draw a native African. Okay. In fact, let's just give that point a little bit of weight right now before we actually move on anywhere, because I think this is important once again to point out. So I'm just gonna, And once again, I'm going to be using local populations to make most of these arguments because it's just much easier to do. Okay. Let me open a new tab. Oh, I won't zoom in. I hate it when it doesn't zoom in, but I'm just going to quickly drag this image onto the screen. Okay. Not rocket science, but just once again, just so we can have that comparison between what you see there in terms of tonality and this group of, I believe this is from Ethiopia, this image. Okay. Look at the skin tones. And this is no different to skin tones we will find in Rwanda, no different to skin tones that we'll find in Nigeria, no different skin tones that we'll find in Chad, no different skin tones that we'll find in South Africa. These are African skin tones. Okay, no one can get that depth of color without being a native African. But you know, that's a very simple point to kind of hopefully everyone can fathom that. But let's continue.
Or perhaps more accurately, what skin color they.
Let's have a look. I didn't see it as what people think. So, so this is this meme. Okay, look, where everyone's trying to make ancient Egyptians fit their race. Okay, which is ridiculous because only one can. And the thing is, they say it ironically, but only that man to me looks like any statue of a pharaoh I've ever seen. Yeah, that's not far from Joseph's statue, if I was going to be honest with you. But they think it's a meme, so there you go.
They were. Most people seem to be able to comprehend the fact that ancient Egypt, in the ancient world and in the modern world, is a land bridge between people living in the Near East and people living in Saharan Africa. Okay, so
first of all there, the land bridge argument. Okay, being a land bridge doesn't instantly make a place a point or multicultural point. Okay, Egypt is in Africa. It always has been in Africa and it always will be in Africa. The fact that it's the part of Africa that connects to what used to be northeast Africa, but is now classified as the Middle East. The fact that it has a land bridge that connects to there is irrelevant, because what we should be concentrating on is where the population lied. And we've had this discussion many times, guys. The population of ancient Egypt, was ancient Egypt populated along the coast of the Mediterranean, or was it populated somewhere else? If you know where the ancient Egyptian population was populated, can you put it in the comments, please? Yeah, so we can make this discussion very simple. Where they populated along the coast of the Mediterranean, or where they populated somewhere else? I'll wait for someone said Upper Egypt. Someone said up the Nile. That's what I was looking for. Not necessarily to the south. I was looking for along the Nile. Ancient Egypt's population was based along the banks of the Nile, and that's why I showed you that image to begin with. All 42 nomes existed along the banks of the Nile and along the banks of the Delta. There were no nomes along the coast of the Mediterranean. Zero. So in as much as they try to make as much of an argument about the importance of the Mediterranean Sea and trade, no ancient Egyptians didn't find the coast of the Mediterranean important enough to put a city there. No one wanted to be situated there because historically it was seen as a place of conflict. The coast of the Mediterranean, native Kemetic people wanted to avoid that place because that's where the trouble came from. And that's where they were placed along the banks of the Nile and not along the coast of the Mediterranean. So acting like the coast of the Mediterranean was a source of kind of like, oh yeah, their identity, it's false. It doesn't have any backing. There's no literary backing to support that. There's no cultural backing to support that. There's very little that the ancient Egyptians inherited in terms of their core culture, if anything, from the Mediterranean. All of their culture came from Central Africa. All of their culture came from Greater Africa and from nowhere else. And we see that in the Medunetta, in their use of imagery. We see that in their artwork. We see it in their language. We see it in every facet of who they were, came from Africa. They were always associated with the Kushites, with the Ethiopians. They certainly were not associated ever historically with the populations of the Mediterranean.
So over thousands of years, you have people with orange skin meeting people with darker brown skin.
Orange skin. Okay, you guys know I have to pause it there. I'm sorry, but who were the populations with orange skin? Could someone tell me that, please? Do they still exist? Or is this another case where people try to create a non-existent race that is now extinct to explain away the fact that they want to move the ancient Egyptians away from their African roots? Let's now create a new race, orange skin. I'm sorry, but even Egyptologists do not ask or do not argue for an orange-skinned population. It's unanimously agreed. Even Metatron was able to say the kind of standardized colors tended to be used for ancient Egyptians was a brown. It was a reddish brown. It was a deep reddish brown. I actually think it was a dark brown, and the reddish part was an undertone, but that's splitting hairs. I'm not going to go into that right now. But either which way, it was a brown. Orange skin tone, I don't know where you got that from. I don't know an orange population. Someone said Donald Trump and Lindsay Lohan. Maybe, but there's no orange population. So are you arguing for a group of people that no longer exist, or do you have an orange population in mind that you want to share with the rest of the world? Because I don't know an orange skinned people. Okay, I know a reddish brown skinned people all along the Nile, like I've mentioned, right next to, in fact, within Egypt itself, you have a reddish brown population. They're called the Nubians. Okay. And Nubians, by the way, is a misnomer. It's not a word that was used contemporaneously with ancient Egypt. So this is another discussion that we have to get into at some point. I'm not sure if we'll do it today, but the fact that that black population in Egypt are now called Nubians is not historical. Okay. Those were that is your native Egyptians if you're looking for them, or at least the closest thing that's currently in the population. But we'll get into that shortly.
And what do they produce? Well, they produce children with skin colors varying from each side of the scale. Every so often you have distant traders from the greater Mediterranean arriving by boat and deciding to stay, making the pool of skin colors marginally paler in some areas of Egypt.
So you've gone from orange. So I'm just trying to this is once again people who make these points and they jump around. So he said ancient Egypt was a mixture of native Africans, who I'm assuming he's saying are black, and orange skinned population, and then mixing creates pale people, because that's the argument that I just heard. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm just confused here. I'm sure, I mean, I'm no expert. I'm sure if you mix deep dark brown with orange, you get medium brown. Okay, you don't get pale. So where did pale come from? So now you've just kind of like introduced this, which goes completely left field of the argument that you've just raised. And this is where, once again, we're jumping through hoops, because I think, like Macy said earlier, it's a presentist argument that he's trying to push. He really wants to kind of like take the modern population of Egypt and, like a square peg for a round hole, make them fit the argument that he's trying to make. It's the modern population of Egypt, the pale one. No, they don't fit. They're not orange. Okay, they have their representation on the walls of Kemet. Okay, their color is not represented in the walls of Kemet, and now you're going to say that it is by making these arguments that don't stand up to any scrutiny. But let's carry on.
Most people can comprehend this. But another popular argument is that the ancient Egyptians must have been an entirely dark-skinned civilization, which...
So there you go. So there's, see, do you remember the point I made earlier? And let me just quickly pull that slide up, because I think this is quite important now. This point that I made earlier, okay? We're an entirely dark-skinned population. Do you notice the clever use? And that's important, because he didn't say we're an entirely African population, because that's invariably true. So if you turn around and said, well, the ancient Egyptians were an entirely African population, he'd be absolutely, he knows that he can't win that argument, because they absolutely were African. Okay, he wants to turn it. He could have said we're entirely black population, but he knows that the black race as it is includes light-skinned and dark-skinned people. So what did he say? He said, oh, an entirely dark-skinned population. So now he's restricting black people to dark skin, even though, like the image I just showed you, black people span many skin tones right up to a yellowy brown. Okay, right up to a yellowy brown, a reddish brown, a deep dark brown. All of those colors you see exhibited in ancient Egyptian artwork are all accessible to the black race. But notice how he plays on the words and he says, oh, entirely dark-skinned population. That's deliberate. That's not accidental. So I just wanted to quickly show that, because that's an important tactic that you're going to see him use, is kind of flip-flopping between these arguments.
Isn't even supported by the statuary work seen in the Old Kingdom, where rulers have this burnt orange skin color.
Sorry, we have to bring that back because I want you to hear that. Yeah. He says, which isn't even supported in the Old Kingdom, where the statues have this burnt orange skin tone. And then he shows 6 very selected images, which we are going to, yes, we are going to break them down one by one.
The ancient Egyptians must have been an entirely dark-skinned civilization, which isn't even supported by the statuary work seen in the Old Kingdom, where rulers have this burnt orange skin color.
So, yeah, let's do this, okay? So his argument against the dark-skinned Egypt, notice he didn't say black, he said the dark-skinned Egypt, yeah, is that it's not seen or not supported in these selected 6 statues from the Old Kingdom, which, by the way, are all in the same room in the Cairo Museum. Yeah, all of these, they're all in the same room. This is what Professor Amping calls the room of fakes. Okay, all of these statues, which have burnt orange complexion, which is a lie in itself, by the way, because if we look at this picture, I can only see 2 that have that burnt orange complexion. Okay, and there's a reason why. So let's just go through these really quickly. We're not going to spend an extended amount of time on the 6 pictures, which, by the way, he's going to reference again later in this video. So his entire argument for burnt orange, for Tango Egypt, his entire, someone said Cheeto dust, his entire argument for Tango / Cheeto / Mirinda colored Egypt is these 6 images, yeah, and they're not even all burnt orange. So let's start off with famous Rahotep and Nofret. Very, very easy for us to debunk. Really, we don't have to go through much of this, because Professor Ampin has already clearly and thoroughly debunked these. Okay, first of all, the hieroglyphs on the shoulders. These are the only statues that have hieroglyphs above the shoulders. This breaks ancient Egyptian protocol, and ancient Egyptian artwork was all about protocol. There were set rules that needed to be followed, and that's what made it ancient Egyptian artwork, because it was also a part of the communication, the community, the political, had political significance in terms of how these statues would be displayed. Putting hieroglyphs behind them, and by the way, painting the hieroglyphs in as opposed to crafting them in. And by the way, you can see that they're not even in straight lines, the hieroglyphs. If you look at them from the front, they're all wonky. There's no kind of like mathematical precision. They're not only fakes, they're the worst fakes that's come out of ancient Kemet. As a couple, they should be embracing each other, not sitting on 2 separate statues right next to each other. We know that the color that's used for Rahotep, this is the only time in ancient Egyptian history that this burnt Cheeto dust Donald Trump Tango orange was used. Okay, it wasn't used in any other statue. He's not even wearing the hairstyle of a prince. The hairstyle of the prince is the Kemetic short twist that is consistent through ancient Egyptian culture. Okay, it's the short twist. You do not see princes wearing this kind of style that breaks the ethno-trichological rules. Queen Nofret is wearing a diadem that's only seen outside of this statue on a Cypriot statue in 500 BC. So this is an entire fake and creation that we've never seen again repeated in ancient Egyptian history. The skin tone used on Queen Nofret, or sorry, Princess Nofret, is never used again on any statue again throughout ancient Egyptian history, this pale cream color that matches modern Egyptians. And everyone's probably seen that postcard of a woman dressed exactly like this that predates the building of this statue. I'm not going to find that, but have fun looking for that. There's an actual postcard of an Egyptian woman who's dressed like this, looks exactly the same, and it predates the building of the statue. There's so many things that I could literally go through. Professor Ampin talks about how prominent her nipples show. The dress that she's wearing is incorrect. Rahotep has got he's got the wrong hand on his lap, and his hand is also in a fist, which you'd only have your hand in a fist if you're holding something. Otherwise, in all ancient Egyptian artwork, the hand is always flat. In fact, we could just do something very quickly. I'm just going to type in Old Kingdom statue, look at a genuine Old Kingdom statue, and then we'll see the Old Kingdom statue, and then we'll see the correct presentation of a prince or a noble. This is a genuine Old Kingdom statue. Let me just open this in a new tab so you can all see this. This is a genuine Old Kingdom statue. Okay, so let me just quickly, I need to open image in the tab. There we go. So bear with me, guys. Thank you. This is a genuine Old Kingdom statue. Okay, the hand that's balled up in a fist, you can clearly see is holding an object. Okay, it's just not balled up for no reason. It clearly held an object. The other hand lies flat on the lap. Okay, you can see that the couple are standing right next to each other. There is no hieroglyphs behind him. He has clearly African features, and he wears the prince's short twisted hairstyle. This is consistent art, and you can see the pigment that has completely rubbed away, which you would expect from a statue that is nearly 5,000 years old, which you expect the pigment has all worn away because it's a genuine statue. You can see the roughness of the surface of it because that's the kind of weathering / wear and tear that you would expect from a statue from the Old Kingdom that is several thousands of years old. This is exactly what you would expect. Where there is remaining pigment, it is very dark. This is a genuine piece. And as you can see, the hieroglyphs, which are carved with precision, are by the feet where they are supposed to be, or sometimes on the sides, but never above the shoulders. This is what a genuine piece of ancient Egyptian artwork looks like. It's consistent. It's consistent with everything we see in the Old Kingdom, including the facial features, proper African facial features. I'm afraid that this statue of Nofret and Rahotep is absolutely a fake. There's not even a discussion to be had. Okay, let's move on to the next statue here, which I believe is a statue of Ranifer. Okay, and I'm just going to pull up the statues of Ranifer because they are ones that have been heavily tampered as well. But it's important that we just quickly have a look at those. So let's have a look at a statue of Ranifer. Sorry, just bear with me. So I'm going to open image in new tab. I'm just going to pull this over. Okay. So this is the statue of Ranifer that he has displayed. Now remember, he said this is a burnt orange statue. I want you to look carefully because this statue has been tampered, but because you can see here where they've used stucco, can you see where there's a change of material here? Okay. I haven't seen this in person, but I'd assume there's more tampering that's taken place on the face. But that aside, I want you to look at the remaining pigment. Does that look burnt orange to you? Does that look burnt orange to you, or does that look deep dark brown? This statue's original color is clearly originally a deep dark brown. It's quite clearly a deep dark brown, not burnt orange. And actually, if you look at the second, there's another statue of Ranifer where the nose has been completely changed. But this statue is supposed to be dark brown. The hair is not correct. And you can see where the change has been made. And this was done a lot in the German works. But if you actually have a look at this, it's a deep dark brown statue. Okay, nothing orange about this. Nothing orange about this. And yet he's said quite clearly, with a lot of convincingly said quite straight, well, look at these Old Kingdom statues that are burnt orange. Well, the one that you've put up there clearly isn't burnt orange. The next statue is a statue of Caper. Let me just pull this one over as well. So this is the next statue he pulled up, which once again, the Egyptian antiquities and a lot of the E4E people used to like to wax lyrical about this, which in my view, I could be being ignorant here, but this is a face that you could put in Uganda very, very easily. Okay. To me, this is a face that you could put in Uganda very easily. But if you have a look at it, all that's happened here is they've just sanded off all of the color. So this isn't even a deliberate landing color. Look down here where you can see remnants of the reddish brown paint, remnants of the brown skin that this person used to have. This has just been sanded down. Okay, that's all that's happened here. They like to sandblast ancient Egyptian artworks to get rid of the pigment. They've done this so many times. You know that I have that short where I showed the Ushabti of King Tutankhamun when they found it and it had the dark brown pigment all over it, and then they sandblasted it and they sanded it all off, and then they ended up looking like Michael Jackson, and they acted like this is the way they found it. They do this all of the time. All that's happened here is that you have something that has been tampered with. Okay, the color has been removed, but even in trying to remove the color, you can still see the remnants that they couldn't get rid of, that dark brown paint. This is not a burnt orange person. Okay, this is an African who has literally had all of his pigment removed. Okay, and by the way, all the people that he's put up on there as well, notice how we haven't come across a single pharaoh. I just want everyone to notice that, because when they make these arguments for non-Black Egypt, they can't refer to the pharaohs. All of the pharaohs look African, every last one of them. That's why they avoid them. They will avoid the artwork when it comes to the people whose artwork you should be using, because it must be the most accurate, which is the royalty, the pharaohs. But they'll pull all of these kind of random people, random scribes, random, not even nobles. I think this is a priest. Okay, so I mean he's up there ish. Yeah, Caper's a priest, but all the other people, you know, that you pull up, they're not even kings and queens, because they have to focus on anything, clutch at straws to anything. Even if they know that this is not the original color, they'll still argue that. So anyway, let's get rid of Caper. And then we have a nameless, literally, this is the nameless seated scribe. Nameless seated scribe. Anything to have an argument. And once again, if I just pull up a close-up of this image, we can clearly see that this has been recently repainted. Clearly see that this has been recently repainted. Okay, clearly see it's been recently repainted. There's no reason why the face should look that orange. This has clearly been tampered with. Okay, we have no idea what we are dealing with to begin with. Even if you look at it, you know, facially, it's just been repainted. This should be looking completely white limestone, I believe, is what you should be looking at. But you can see, look, why? Ask yourself this question: when in ancient Egyptian history have you seen an unfinished piece of artwork like this? Someone answer me that question, because Dr. Ampum would have a field day here. When would you see them half paint and then just finish? Like, did they run out of time or something? What happened? Did they like start it and then this is, oh, we're not going to finish it? This is clearly been painted in recent times. And you can see what they like to do is they like to get rid of the paint. And then remember, I talked about the fact they like to restore the eyeliner and restore the dark parts like the hair to create this idea of contrast. In reality, when they found this, it probably had no pigment on any of it and would have just looked like a normal ancient Egyptian piece of artwork. But then they create kind of an illusion in your mind by the false paint job that they put on top of it. That's all they do. This is just absolutely a tampered piece of work. But if you want to, if you need that win, that W so much that you're going to take something that any moderate observer will look at and say, well, that looks like it's been tampered recently, doesn't it? If you need that W so much, you need that for your burnt orange hypothesis, have it, because he's a nameless seated scribe anyway. So have your nameless seated scribe, because you never know, he might have come from the, the land of the orange people and might have converted and become, you know, been naturalized as a Kemetic person. You know, Africans are welcoming. Hey, this might be the one true burnt orange person that existed in ancient Kemet. Fine, have him. Because you know what? We're okay with the fact that all of the pharaohs, all of the queens presented as black people. Yeah, presented as Africans. We can prove that. That's easy to prove. So have your nameless, sunburned, orange seated scribe. That's okay. You can have that. If it's a W for you, that's no problem. And then finally, oh look, he's got another. Is that Ranifer again there? I think that's Ranifer again. And then he's got another image of Ranifer, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, it is. He's got another image of Ranifer. And this one I've shown you guys previously. Let me just quickly pull this up on the screen. So let me give a quick shout out. I think I've missed a couple of donations. Baker Boy 3, thank you very much. Let me just quickly put you on the screen. Sorry guys, I know, you know, when I get into these, I get a little bit in my world and I miss some of the donations, so please forgive me. Baker Boy 3, I want to give a big thank you to you for your $1.99 donation. I didn't miss it. I was just in a zone. And also I want to give a shout out to Macy. Thank you very much for your $4.99 donation there. She said, it takes a lot of hate to go through that much effort to tamper with beautiful art. I totally agree. But we know that already. We were talking yesterday about the statue of Sobekemsaf of the 17th dynasty, whose nose was exactly like mine and they knocked it off. I think we'll touch a couple of those kind of like tampered artworks as a part of this stream today. But just want to go through those. The last one that I wanted to show you really quickly before we move on was, like I said, the last statue of Ranifer that is gone, because I wanted to make sure that I attack every single one of the points that I guess he's trying to make here. Okay, so this is the statue of Ranifer. This one has a completely replaced nose, by the way. Completely different piece of limestone that was used for the nose on this one of Ranifer. But if you look at the skin again, look at the dark brown there. Okay, so we have kind of two shades of skin. We have a reddish, kind of like a red, and a dark brown. Okay, and a dark brown is clearly the top coat. Okay, it's inconsistent, as you can see, but it's there. Okay, so none of these. Ancient Egypt is the only place where people will look at a statue and they know that it's faded over time, and they'll completely ignore that it's faded and say this is the proper color. Do you know they have faded statues everywhere? There are faded statues out of ancient Rome, out of ancient Greece, and no one takes that final alabaster limestone to be the final color, because everyone can appreciate that it looked different, apart from in ancient Egypt where people must try and squeeze in races that don't belong there into the narrative. Okay, that's what they must do. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about this statue of Ranifer, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm not sure how I feel about it, because there's a relief of Ranifer where he looks completely different and he has a completely different hairstyle. So I'm not sure how I feel about either of these. There's just something that doesn't sit right with me, but I'm not going to argue against that. I'm going to stick to, because I don't have any proof of that. And when I do have proof, I'll share it with you. But at the moment, because I don't have any proof of that, the only thing that I will say to you about this statue is that it's not burnt orange. Okay, because that was the point that he was trying to make. So of the 6 that he posted up, we have 2 fakes, 1 definitely repainted, one that was dark brown, one that has been completely skinned, but you could see evidence that it was dark brown, and another one that is basically brown. So no burnt orange statues, or at least no genuine burnt orange statues on display. So just to be clear about that. All right. And let me just do a quick shout out to as well, Falcon, the black belt. It says, paying tithes, you are truth, and you have pioneered a stream of truth seekers. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's very kind words. Let's carry on.
Even supported by the statuary work seen in the Old Kingdom, where rulers have this burnt orange skin color. And then something really bizarre I saw last week was someone claiming that the Egyptians could have been.
This guy is a lunatic, Robert Sepaher. That's one person who I would never waste my time refuting their work, because he's just so far beyond. It's not even, no point in even addressing people like him.
Been white?
Oh my God, bro. Oh hell no, man. What the man?
Anyway, I think it's time.
Now, and just to be clear, so he's made that kind of point that, oh well, you know, it's crazy that people will think that the ancient Egyptians are white. Yeah. And then he moves on. But what he's done there very subtly is he's tried to equate the black argument versus the white argument. So you've taken a crazy lunatic like Robert Sepahar, who doesn't bring any evidence. He just kind of like pulls out very, very random poems or whatever. And the occasional mummy that has bright colored hair for logical reasons, which you've explained on a channel several times, and then says, you know, they were a race of Nordic blonde people with blue eyes, and it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy by the powers that be, the Egyptologists, to hide the whiteness of the ancient Egyptians. Yeah, that's the kind of argument he makes. But this guy here is equating the Black Egypt argument with that, the African Egypt argument with that. But we have evidence. We have that important thing that he's lacking here. Luke is lacking this. Robert's lacking this. Is we have strong evidence. We have craniometric evidence. Okay, with the skulls of ancient Egyptians being entirely consistent with populations of the Nile, entirely consistent, dolichocephalic, rear kind of like occipital protrusion, i.e. the back of the head sticks out, prognathism, the same dental traits with the diastema, overbite, overjet. All of these things are consistent with populations that live along the Nile to this day. And it's very, very common in ancient Egyptians, particularly in some of the most best preserved mummies we have are from the New Kingdom, which is why we've been able to glean so much data from the New Kingdom pharaohs. They are all unequivocally African, all of them. And this is why people who make the Black Egypt argument make it with such confidence and make it with such absoluteness, because it's kind of like, well, look, if I came across something that wasn't consistent with Africa, I would put my hand up and say, well, this isn't consistent with the African phenotype. I haven't found that yet, at least along the pharaonic class. I haven't found that. So we have craniometric, we have the anthropometric argument. Okay, we have Dr. Robbins, Gay Robbins, who did the anthropometric measurements, and Sonia Zakruski, and they both came back and they said the limb proportions of ancient Egyptians were supernegroid. In other words, they had the longer distal segments, i.e. the longer arms, the longer tibia bones. That's typical of Africans, the shorter torso. In fact, they have an extreme version of it, which is what you see in East Africans, okay, along with distance runners, people like Kenyans, who have those really long limbs. That's what you see in ancient Egypt. Now, the reason that's significant is because you don't get that at all, okay? You don't get that at all amongst Eurasians. They don't have these limb proportions. They don't access these. You won't find Eurasians with these limb proportions. These are almost exclusively African. So unlike the dolichocephaly, which by itself isn't exclusively African, because you can get people who are dolichocephalic on a rarity outside of the African continent. It's the specific type of dolichocephaly that you see in ancient Egyptians with the rear protrusion of the head that is very specific to Africans, very specific. So all of these things alongside the limb proportions, everything just spells out African bodies. And that's what you get with all of the ancient Egyptian mummies. KV 55, King Tutankhamun, KV 35, Thutmose first, second, third, the younger leg, all of them are just unequivocally African bodies. You have the genetic evidence, the autosomal DNA. The only autosomal DNA taken from pharaohs was taken from the New Kingdom pharaohs by Zahi Hawass in 2008. Those results have been run through several STR databases, and they always come back unequivocally African. 30 times more likely to be related to Southern Africans and Great Lakes Africans than modern North Africans. 30 times more likely. Yeah, not 30%, 30 times more likely. That's 3,000% more likely to be related to Africans in the continent, deep within the continent, than they are to be related to people in North Africa. This is another fact. This is something that you can't argue with. Why do you think they don't test pharaohs anymore? Why do you think they're always trying to find the most obscure mummies out in different places when they have all this pharaonic DNA, which would just draw a line underneath it? It's because they've already got the data from the pharaohs. They know what the pharaohs are going to tell them. We have consistency with the languages. Okay, ancient Egyptians spoke an African language. The only way that you can translate ancient Egyptian is using African languages. You can translate ancient Egyptian using languages around the Nile, using not only Afro-Asiatic languages, I wouldn't say Afro-Asiatic languages, I would say one or two Afro-Asiatic languages, but also languages deep within the continent of Africa, spanning from Wolof to Yoruba to the Proto-Bantu languages, i.e., Kenya, Rwandan, Zulu, Luanda. All of these languages give you the ability to translate ancient Egyptians. They all use many terms that the ancient Egyptians used. You don't get that elsewhere. There's a very clear line that's being drawn from the ancient Egyptians to modern African populations that you don't get elsewhere. Their hairstyles, their hair texture. Okay, all of the ancient Egyptian hairstyles require African hair, and this is why a lot of people don't know. I'm not sure if this guy Luke knows, but this is why they call the ancient Egyptian hairstyles Nubian wigs. This is why, for them, the ancient Egyptians they absolutely must all wear wigs, because the only way we can explain these hairstyles is to say ancient Egyptians fetishized African hair, because they found the wigs, and the wigs all are made out of black African hair. So they have to say, well, all ancient Egyptians wore wigs and they just wanted to look like Africans, but they weren't Africans. That's why they're called Nubian wigs, and that's why they're called Nubian hairstyles. This is what Egyptology says. Okay, there's no argument about the Africanity of their hair. The problem with that argument is that we have very many images proving that in many cases it was their natural hair. Okay, in fact, let me just quickly share an image that I know you guys have all seen. Because I've shared this many times. Oh, why is it so small? No, okay, let's click into it. That's better. Open image in new tab. So let me just share this image with you guys quickly. I'm sure you've all seen it before. Why didn't it let me open the image? There you go. This is ancient Egyptian barber. Okay, you guys have all seen this before. Why is this image so significant? Because the man getting his hair done, his hair stands up on end. Okay, only Afro hair stands up on the end, and you can see that he's getting plaits put in his hair. This is not a wig sitting on top of a mannequin. This is his natural hair, and you can see it growing out of his head. All right, this is, and obviously you guys have probably seen, I don't know, I wish I'd actually, in fact, let me find the image because I've probably got it saved somewhere already. Let me find a nice comparative image for that. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Sorry, guys, bear with me. Boom, boom, boom. So it's going to take a second. Oh, I don't know how the comparative image. That's irritating. Oh, that's annoying. Okay, I'll have to try and find it. Let me do a quick live search for twists. There we go. There we go. That wasn't too hard, was it? Open image in new tab. Okay, so this is a man from the Afar tribe of Ethiopia. And just for comparison, look at this image over here. This man who's getting his hair twisted, and an African man getting the hair twisted. Okay, this is just continuity. All right, this is continuity of culture, continuity of styles. All right, we continue to wear the same hairstyles that were worn in ancient Egypt. Okay, there's so much continuity. I mean, there's so many arguments I could talk about. People have been putting it in the comments. I could talk about the dress. I could talk about the neck collars that they wear, that the Zulu wear, okay, that are still worn amongst the ancient Egyptians, and the Xhosa, and the Xhosa wear them as well. Okay, we could talk about the V-neck scarf that's worn by, I think, people of Ethiopia, and I think it's also worn amongst the Southern African tribes as well, or Southern African ethnicities. We could talk about artwork. Okay, the features and artwork. You saw that Old Kingdom statue that I showed you guys. Did I do a special search, or did I just type in Old Kingdom statue and it brought up an African man with twist in his head? That's how easy it is. We could go through all of the artwork, look at the features. We could look at the color of the artwork, the color of the artwork. Look at the color of this artwork. Okay, notice how these images is the ones they won't use. Are these burnt orange people? Are these burnt orange people, or are they exactly the same complexion as what you see over here? Is there any difference between the complexion of these men and the complexion of this man over here? There's absolutely no difference. And yet they're going to swear blind. Oh, look, well, they're not black. They're not black, are they? It's like, dude, no one. Well, I'm not going to say no one, but it's a very small minority of black people in the African continent that are actually black. Okay, we're brown. Most black people are brown. Some are black, blue black. The most like beautiful, godly people amongst the South Sudanese, Andaman Islanders who aren't even African. You know, you get some people who are blue black. It looks absolutely divine. Those people look godlike, but that's not a majority of Africans. I am dark brown. Most Africans, most black people, most modern Africans live along the Nile are brown. But this is where they use semantics, because they claim that word brown. And because they use that word brown for Arabs, they'll say, well, look, they're brown. It's like, yes, they are brown, but not the brown race. They're literally brown in color. Okay, brown in color equals black. The brown race are cream. Yeah. Does it need spelling out? No, because this is the kind of mental gymnastics that they use, you know, to try and include themselves in a discourse that doesn't include them. It can be very frustrating. Anyway, let's carry on.
Time to set the record straight on who the ancient Egyptians were, where they came from, and how many times their racial composition changed during their ancient history. And at the end of this video, I think that you'll have a pretty good understanding of how vast, diverse, and complicated ancient Egypt's history really is. So we have evidence of people living in Egypt as far back as 1 million years ago. This vast era marks what we call the Paleolithic period, spanning from around...
So 1 million years ago. I only paused it to make sure that everyone in that image is black. Oh, no, I think he's squeezing. I mean, he's gone for a bit of racial. I mean, yeah, okay. Let's let me not nitpick, because it's gonna drive me crazy. All right, just making sure, because obviously we know 1 million years ago there'd be no reason that would be anyone in these images that are not phenotypically aligned with modern Africans. But anyway,
1 million years ago to around 7,000 years ago, or 5,000 BC. During this long period, sites like el Ka'ab, Nag Ahmed, Bar el Ha'ar, the Dakhla Oasis, and the Fayum were inhabited primarily by Homo erectus. And
now, just to be clear, he's given us all these. Sometimes the toponyms that are used, i.e. the place names that are used, throw people off. Okay. Yeah, because places aren't named or given African names, it throws people off. But remember the map I showed you earlier, okay, regarding the length of the Nile and the populations that live along the Nile. This can be called the Dakhla Oasis or Bar el Hajar or Nag it's Black Africa. Okay, so irrespective of what these places are called, irrespective of them having modern Arab names, because these aren't ancient names, these are modern names, irrespective of those places having modern Arab names. This is in Africa, and this is in a time span where everyone in Africa, before the Circassian slave trade brought in different races, everyone in Africa would have been looking like the modern African people, okay, i.e. dark-skinned, or medium skin toned, African features, African, okay? These are all Africans, to be very, very, very clear about that.
Early Homo sapiens who were arriving in Egypt and attempting to adapt and overcome specific challenges of surviving in this environment. Now, this was many, many thousands of years before the pharaohs. And these Egyptians lived a vastly different life than what we imagine life in ancient Egypt to have been like. While they did mostly live along the Nile.
How is it different? I don't know if I agree with that. He said they lived vastly different lives. Okay, so I'm assuming he's talking about the alleged introduction of pastoralism, which seems to date somewhere from around 5 to 4,000 BC. So I'm guessing he's going to assume, or he's going to suggest, that they're all hunter-gatherers, which I guess has some difference, but I guess there's evidence to suggest that pastoralism predates what is being suggested here. So I'm not sure if it would have been vastly different, but anyway, I'll let him carry on.
River, these were semi-nomadic people, hunter-gatherer groups who seemed to have never settled in one spot for too long, although multiple waves of hunter-gatherers separated.
So I noticed the choice of images here, because I've just noticed these people are getting whiter and whiter and whiter. And I know this is obviously just AI artwork that he's chosen here, but there's clearly a decision that he's made here to include these pieces of artwork. Just so everyone's clear, yeah? He's talking about, let me just pull this up really quickly. Where's my slideshow gone? Yeah. So just to be clear, let's just pull this onto the screen, yeah? So just to be clear, he's talking about, this is Africa and Europe, obviously, you guys know that. But he's talking about a population that lives here, yeah, along the Nile, that has been migrating from here. Now, I struggle to understand why, in the assumption that people have been migrating from the Sahara, which was the Green Sahara, yeah, into, and obviously from here as well, because, you know, mankind originated from, you know, from there, from the Great Lakes region. So we would have had migration from, I'm guessing, all of these directions. Now, if that was the case, and people are basically migrating from inner Africa towards the Nile, then why on earth would you approximate their skin tone to look like that? What exactly are the climatic drivers, the environmental drivers that are forcing people to evolve lighter skin in those circumstances? I need to understand that. Why would you assume, why are we just going to, and this is what, it's done very deliberately, because he's not going to explain why these Africans who are migrating to the Nile Valley are white. He's not going to explain it. He's just going to show you it. He'll bombard you with these images so that in your mind, oh, well, they were white to begin. No, you've done nothing to support that. These are Africans migrating from one part of Africa to another. There's no evidence for any paling of the skin. We know where pale skin came from in Africa, and we know what time it arrived and why it arrived. And this is really important. He'll miss out on these really important factors and just start feeding you with these propagandistic images.
By thousands of years, seem to have chosen many of the same locations to settle down, at least temporarily. As far as we know, these people didn't build.
Look, they're still getting lighter. This is Africa here, people. Yeah, these are people migrating from inner Africa. Yeah, where is this coming from? This is light. This is light even for a modern Egyptian, man. Come on, man. This is this is not scientific at all. You have to justify that. If you're going to show that image of people, you have to justify where you got that tone from. Because even he said that. I don't understand. Even he said that the orange people, remember he said the orange people came from the north. That's what he said earlier, isn't it? He said the orange people came from the north. So who are these people? They're not even orange, but where did they come from? What was their origin point? Why have they evolved white on the African continent? That's the most useless. That is the most useless and backwards evolutionary trick that your body could play on, on a population. I'm going to make you white in Africa. That's useful. Big shout out to James. Thank you very much, sir, for your $9.99 donation. Appreciate that very, very, very much. Let's carry on.
Shelters substantially enough to survive tens or hundreds of thousands of years later. If they weren't living in huts, they may have had local.
Wow, we've just gone full on. Do you remember he said earlier? And there's even people who believe that the ancient Egyptians were white. This has got me thinking. Does Luke think he's not white? Because that's the only thing I can think of. He clearly thinks. So this is what I'm talking about with the semantics, where races are flipped between. I think when he says white, he thinks literally like a piece of paper, and anything that has a little bit of color is therefore not white. Because what he's doing, he's now bombarding us with images of clearly white people who have just who've just materialized out of the desert sand. Just like come out of the desert sand in Africa. This desert sand in Africa, and just kind of like, oh yes, we're here. It's like, what are you doing in Africa in 8000 BC? This is not even supported. No one supports this. Let's just quickly have a look at a few things actually, because this is probably a good time to segue, okay, to some data that maybe Luke's aware of, maybe he isn't. I don't know, but let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick segue. I'm just going to pop something on the screen really quickly. Bear with me. That's not the start, is it? Okay, maybe that is. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this on the screen. Bear with me. Okay, let's go through some of these facts together. Okay. Some of you might have seen this recent study. Okay, 3rd of March it was released. Britons were mostly black 5,000 years ago. Not just 5,000 years ago. Let's read a quote from data from 348 ancient genomes gathered from across Eurasia have been reconstructed by scientists at the University of Ferrara in Italy. Listen to the next quote, which shows almost all Europeans had dark skin until around 3,000 years ago. So until 1000 BC, all, not some, all Europeans had dark skin. Okay, dark skin, not orange skin, dark skin. Let's carry on. There's more. Oops, where is it? Okay, early Britons. They found the Stone Age Briton had dark hair with small probability that it was curlier than average, blue eyes and skin. This is talking about Cheddar Man. That was probably dark brown to black, or dark brown or black. Okay, this is what dark brown or black looks like. Cheddar Man has the genetic markers of skin pigmentation usually associated with sub-Saharan Africans. We know what they mean when they say sub-Saharan. Let's carry on. Let's look at Natufians. These are kind of like our early Europeans that the ones that basically touched in Europe and then came back to Africa, and everyone calls them European for that fact. This is based on craniometrics. This is a study done by Dr. Lauren Brace, who, by the way, is a racist. Well, I'm not going to call him a racist, that's strong. Is someone who's very racially questionable in the way he does his studies. He consistently clustered the Natufian skulls, yeah, as basically sitting in a family with other Africans. We can see in this case, it sits close to Nubian, early Upper Paleolithic Europeans. Bear in mind the study we just saw that said all Europeans before 3,000 years were black. But basically clusters very, very close with other African civilizations. So other African people. Let's carry on. And you can see on another metric clustered basically in line with Northeast Africans and Niger Congo, which is basically your modern West and Central Africans. And let's just read what it says here. We report genome-wide ancient DNA from this is another study, by the way. So this is a separate study. This one was based on phenotype. So this is based on what they look like. So Natufians basically looked like modern black Africans. That's been proven. We know from the other study that they had dark skin. So skulls like black Africans. Let's stack this up. Dark skin, yeah, like Africans. And let's read what this genome report says. We report genome-wide ancient DNA from 44 ancient Near Easterners ranging in time between 12,000 and 1400 BCE. From Natufian hunter-gatherers from Bronze Age farmers, we show that the earliest populations of the Near East derived around half of their ancestry from a basal Eurasian. Now, don't let that distract you. Lineage that had little, if any, Neanderthal admixture. Now, let me ask you a quick question. I'll finish reading actually. And that separated from, and they separated from other non-African lineages prior to their separation from each other. Now, what do all non-Africans, particularly Eurasians, have in common? Every single last one. Someone tell me, relating to what we just read. Someone pop it in the chat. What do all non-Africans have in common in terms of their genetics? All modern, thank you, Zehoven, very quick off the mark. Neanderthal DNA. All of them. Every single last one. That is consistent. That is consistent. Only Africans, or I should say only melanated Africans, don't carry Neanderthal DNA. That's a fact. So what this study is basically saying is the Natufians, who we already know were craniometrically black, were also genetically black. These early Europeans or basal Eurasians that they continually try to make basically distract you through semantics and obfuscation to say, oh, well, they're Eurasian are just black Africans who were in Europe. That's all they were. Black Africans that were in Europe. This is proven now, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, there's a reason I said all of that, okay? There's a reason I said all of that. Let's quickly summarize why I said all of that, because he's gone through this whole thing, all right? Now, those studies prove that everyone in here, whoops, what's going on? Is it frozen? Come back. Whoops. So, everyone in here is black. Everyone in here is black. And as we saw earlier, everyone in here is probably black. So why on earth, someone tell me, where are the environmental factors that made this population here white? Where is that coming from? Because I'm assuming he assumed that all of that stuff was coming from up here. But the studies say that everyone up here during that time was already black, and everyone down here is black. So it makes sense that everyone over here was also black. The only way they can put these non-black people into ancient Egypt is by creating these fictional imagery and these fictional backstories which ignore the facts of the data that they're actually pulling from. That's these are my these are studies that I'm quoting from. Yeah, this isn't my opinion. Okay, this isn't my opinion. These are studies that I'm pulling from, and they are saying that all of these people were black. All of these surrounding populations were black. So where are you getting these light-skinned people migrating from the Sahara into Egypt? Where is that coming from? Because my brain can't fathom it. I'm sorry. I'm just communicating the truth with you. Let's carry on.
Caves to take refuge in. And in fact, in 1933, the Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi discovered a Paleolithic site in the farthest reaching western deserts of Egypt. Now, this site, known as the Cave of Swimmers, dates back about 10,000 years and is famous for its cave art depicting figures.
Now, whether or not these people are swimming, I'm sure he can see that these people are painted black. Now, they could have just been doing it to, you know, just to have detail or whatever, but I don't understand why he's using this as evidence for who the Egyptians were and then providing us with images of people that look like they just, you know, popped out of Sweden. I don't understand it. You know, it's not making any sense to me. Someone needs to kind of like make it make sense.
With their legs bent and stretched out as if they were swimming. Now, why is there a depiction of people
I noticed that they're not swimming with like
1,000 years?
Long
Laszlo Almasi discovered a Paleolithic site in the farthest reaching western deserts of Egypt. Now, this site, known as the Cave of Swimmers, dates back about 10,000 years and is famous for its cave art depicting figures with their legs bent.
What is it about this image that makes you think they're anything but black Africans?
And stretched out as if they were swimming. Now, why is there a depiction of people swimming deep inside of a cave hidden in the middle of the Sahara Desert? And furthermore, there are also depictions of a giraffe and a hippopotamus.
Do I have to tell anyone? I mean, anyone wants to answer to me, what does a giraffe and a hippopotamus have in common? I won't leave it paused for too long. Answers in the chat. What do giraffes and hippopotamus have in common?
Well, it's actually archaeological evidence like this that indicates a much greener and more tropical Sahara must have existed sometime around 10,000.
And thank you, RJ Mackenzie. Just put the simple word Africa. Okay? African. Giraffes and hippopotamus, African creatures. Once again, proving that everything is coming from Africa. Now, the cope that he has to create, and he's been doing it quite successfully so far, is to insist that the population of Africa, for some reason, was white to begin with. I don't understand why that would be the case. Africa is still equatorial. Yeah, the Green Sahara is still going to be a place where everyone is going to be black, because if mankind originated in Africa, which is what your scientists say, yeah, they originated basically along the equatorial region, then we have to assume that default color is black. Your hypothesis of these pale-skinned people walking around is, for some reason, these people evolved white skin whilst remaining on the African continent. For what reason? I will need you to explain, because I don't understand it.
1,000 years ago. Even though the Green Sahara would have been a much more inviting environment to live in as compared to the Sahara today, the intent.
I mean, he mixed it up a little bit there. There we go. We got some Khoisan there, or Koena people.
Ultraviolet radiation from the North African sun would have caused these Saharan ancestors to evolve a much darker skin color to protect them from the sun.
Wait a second. You know I'm not going to let him get away with that. No, I'm not going to let him get away with that. Let's rewind that back, guys, because I almost talked over that. Listen,
Sahara would have been a much more inviting environment to live in as compared to the Sahara today. The intense ultraviolet radiation from the North African sun would have caused these Saharan ancestors to evolve a much darker skin color to protect them from the sun.
Guys, you know what I'm going to have a problem with here? Okay, so let's unpack, because this is like yesterday's live stream. You know, I'll go in here so peaceful, and then I just start getting infuriated when I hear stupid things, man. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's get a different color. Okay, these scribbles are gonna get wild today, guys. Let's get blue. Okay, so The people that we're talking about, let's draw. Drawing's fun. Let's draw. The people that we're talking about, modern human beings, yeah, basically come from this region over here. Yeah. They traveled. So by the way, this region over here is basically along the equator. That's where roughly your equator lies. Yeah. The people here where mankind was born came from the equator. Yeah. They migrated, yeah, let's say up to the Sahara, yeah, had a little spready around the Sahara, yeah. So they migrated around the Sahara, yeah, and then, yeah, they ended up up here, yeah, in Northeast Africa. And then when they got here, by the way, which is the furthest they've been from the equator so far, they decided to evolve darker skin. Yeah. So they evolved darker skin when they got here because of the intensity of the heat of the Sahara. Not when they were living along the equator. That wasn't hot enough, no. The only way this stupidity can make sense is if you're arguing that mankind that originated, Homo sapiens sapien, that originated on the African continent were white by default and had to evolve dark skin, which is the most stupid argument, which is not supported by any science, because the only default Homo sapiens sapiens, 100% Homo sapiens sapiens on the planet are all black, all of them. Every last one of remaining people on this planet who have 100% Homo sapiens sapien genetics are black. There is no defense, no logic behind an argument that black people had to evolve darker skin, particularly if they hadn't left the African continent. This is absolutely ridiculous. And if that was the case, where Africans evolved the darker skin, even though they were on the African continent and even though they were black to begin with, then why do you need mutations for lighter skin? If white skin is the default, or light skin or bright skin, or whatever you want to call it, is the default, why does it require a mutation to attain it now? If it was the default, all it would require is the removal of mutations, and then we'll default back to white. But that doesn't happen. We require mutations in the genome to attain or to access white skin. We don't require mutations in the genome for dark skin. Very simple. Let me get this diagram off the screen, let it continue. Man, this is only a 15-minute video. I've rambled too much.
Although, as you go further back in time, their facial features would have looked increasingly different from our own. Their skin color would have been what we call today black. At this same time, though, we can't ignore the population. So, as you go further back in time, their facial features would have looked increasingly different from our own. Their skin color would have been what we call today black.
So isn't that just a contradiction? Because you're saying that the further back in time you go, they would have been black. But then you just said they evolved darker skin. So I don't understand. This is now just confusing me. Let me play it.
The Sahara today, the intense ultraviolet radiation from the North African sun would have caused these Saharan ancestors to evolve a much darker skin color to protect them from the sun. Although, as you go further back in time, their facial features would have looked increasingly different from our own. Their skin color would have been what we call today black. At this,
yeah, that's just the contradiction. So he's just contradicting himself now. So this is where we're just talking for the sake of talking. I mean, feel free to correct me, right? It sounds like a total contradiction. He's saying they evolved darker skin, but the further back in time you go, they were black. So this is the thing. Even he doesn't understand what he's talking about, because he's trying to fit light skin into this dialogue and there's no room for it. He's realizing, well, back in time, they were black and the Sahara is hot, so they needed black skin to survive. But I have to put white people in there. Well, I have to put light skin in there somewhere. I have to squeeze my orange race in somewhere. You don't have to squeeze your orange race in. Okay. It's not necessary to have orange people in this dialogue. Okay, it's not necessary.
Same time, though, we can't ignore the populations who are also developing in the Near East, Turkey, and Greece, all having evidence of habitation dating back at least some 200,000 years. These people would eventually come to meet these Paleolithic Egyptians, if they hadn't already, as trade routes and the ease by which human beings had the ability to travel began to rapidly increase.
Okay, so first of all, that's overstated. Yeah, that's overstated. And second of all, and more importantly, in case we forgot, "348 ancient genomes gathered from across Eurasia have been reconstructed by scientists at the University of Ferrara in Italy, which shows almost all Europeans had dark skin until around 3,000 years ago." So the people or the populations that would have migrated, even though it's overstated and we haven't got that much evidence for it, because all ancient Egyptian culture and industry is indigenously African. There's very little evidence of borrowings and gene flow, but whatever, let's say that there is, because I know a lot of people pushed the Natufian argument. You've already seen that the Natufians were absolutely black Africa. These were just black people in Europe, black people in Eurasia, black people across different parts of the world. That's all it was.
Around 10,000 years ago, something catastrophic was beginning to happen in the Sahara. All of the fertile land that the newly sedentary farmers were beginning to raise cattle on was drying up. The rivers were running dry and the ground became unable to bear the limited plants that ancient farmers were learning to grow. With increasingly limited options, these ancient Saharans had only 3 choices to make. They were probably familiar with trading caravans that arrived every so often from the northern coastline. They also must have known there were more people living farther to the south in what we would call...
Okay, so notice he pushed the, they were aware of caravans that come from the northern coastline. Notice how that had nothing to do with what we're talking about. First of all, you didn't provide any proof of there being caravans arriving along the coast. But let's say, for the sake of argument, the Green Sahara was absolutely a ecosystem within itself. It was absolutely an economy within itself. I've never heard it pushed that the population in the Green Sahara were regularly interacting with caravans from the coastal region. Okay, if we're talking about the Fertile Crescent, that has very kind of like distinct dates when that was really becoming a thing, when those populations and those civilizations were becoming a thing. The Green Sahara was within itself an African populace of African groups of people interacting with each other and trading with each other. You just mentioned the coastal villages because once again, you're trying to push this narrative of continual gene flow, but it's totally irrelevant to this discussion. We're talking about the drying of the Sahara. We're talking about an African population moving from the Central African Sahel region, from the Central African, even part of the Guinea region of Africa, and moving and migrating into different parts of Africa. These are these are modern African people. Okay, there's nothing about this where we even need to have a discussion about those coastal arrivals and caravans of people. What kind of boats did they have back? No disrespect, but according to modern history, the boats weren't even that impressive back then. Okay, now maybe they were, because I don't buy into, but if we're talking about your traditional mainstream history, what large scale boats were bringing mass loads of people into these kind of coastal villages? You know that is a massive fabrication, exaggeration on your part. You've just mentioned it to push your orange race theory.
Call today the Congo or the Savannah. But they may have also heard of this river valley out to the east where displaced Saharans were finding a lush, tropical, fertile strip of land that existed along a huge freshwater river, perfect for continuing.
And notice how short he's drawn the Nile here. The Nile would have been substantial. Now, obviously, I'm assuming he's got this image from somewhere, but look, it's got his signature in the corner. I know that's a part of the video. Ignore me. But we know that the Nile extends right to central/southern Africa. Like, it goes very, very deep into Africa. Why do we have this short image of the Nile? Is that a part of the agenda here, to distract people from the fact that the Nile is very much, when people were migrating to the Nile, they weren't just migrating to the Delta region. The Delta region only got settled when the two lands became one. And we know, well, if we're going to go by mainstream Egyptology, we know that's well around 3,500 BC, okay, or 3,100 if you call it that, but let's say 3,500 BC. In this time period that he's talking about here, people have been settling all along the banks of the Nile, right down to the Great Lakes region, not just in this small northern part. But he won't want to address that, because then that will have to address the fact that we're talking about an African ecosystem and an African river system and a culture that runs right down into Central Africa, which is what they always try to distract you from.
The kind of life they were starting to build for themselves. This gradual migration out of the Sahara into the Nile Valley continued until around 4000 BC, when various tribes and chiefdoms began to spring up across the Nile.
Is he paying attention to his dotted line here that runs from the Sahel, yeah, into the Nile, yeah, not from coastal caravans, and certainly not from anywhere else? Is he assuming that the people of tropical Africa were these tanned orange people? I hope he's aware of that.
These cultures produced pottery that we can see today, depicting daily life, animals, and even river boats with flags and sails on them.
By the way, those potteries also only depict, once again, indigenous African animals, like the African auroch, which was bred with African cattle to form the modern Shanga cattle. Okay. Once again, people ignore the fact that there's a cultural continuity even from the pre-dynastic era to the modern era that shows only African culture. So when they try and push this kind of like Near Eastern Levantine influence, the one thing you'll notice that is always sorely missing is evidence. They can't bring evidence of flora or fauna from these regions. They don't bring any evidence that any of this culture is carried along. They don't bring any evidence of words that were brought from these regions. All you see is a constant, continual line of African influence to form this culture that we know, which ended up, because we end up calling it ancient Egypt or Kemet or Tawi, the two lands. All you see is influence from inner Africa. In fact, let's just support that really quickly. Let's have a look really quickly at a few quotes, because I think these are quite significant. And this is once again a part of Egypt's history that they'll never want to touch on. So let's just look at a few quotes together, okay? Lucian, 2nd century CE, Syrian goddess, says, so the original Greek said, Osiris came from Ethiopia. So this is legends that were passed down in antiquity, okay? And these would have been picked up from somewhere. Osiris, yeah, that's I remember I've said to you before, every single ancient Egyptian deity started as a real person, okay? Ancient Egyptians were, or the Kemetic people were, into ancestral veneration, just like modern Africans are. It's the same thing that you see in the Yoruba religion. All of the quote unquote gods of the Yoruba religion would have been people that existed and passed away, and they were passed into personification. They were personified and they were given attributes. We saw it happen in real time in ancient Egypt. We saw people like Amos Nefertari become deities that were worshipped right into the 19th, 20th and 21st dynasty. They were still, I say worshipping with quotes, but they were still venerating and looking upon and doing imagery and learning from the life of Amos Nefertari several hundreds of years after she passed. Imhotep, all of these people were later deified. So just to be clear, them saying Osiris came from Ethiopia is significant, because it's not just telling you about a god, a deity. Osiris is seen as a patriarch of ancient Kemet. So they're saying that's where their people came from. Let's carry on, because there's more. Let's read a few of these together. Hippocrates, the Egyptians are of dark hue and have curly hair. Okay, we know that. I want to focus on, obviously we know that these arguments about everyone, most of the ancient scribes and philosophers talk about the fact that the ancient Egyptians were black, but I really do want to focus in on this relationship that they have with Ethiopia. Diodorus Siculus says here, the Ethiopians say that the Egyptians are one of their colonies. Now, why on earth would Diodorus write that the Egyptians were one with the Ethiopians? And by the way, Ethiopians, to be clear with everyone, it was Central Africans. Okay, that would have been the Kushites. That would have been, it was basically the blanket term that the most people gave to most of the central, like kind of like from Sudan southwards, okay, and somewhat westwards as well. So south and west of Sudan, the people were basically given the name Ethiopians as a kind of like a blanket name. The Ethiopians say that the Egyptians are one of their colonies, which was brought into Egypt by Osiris. So once again, that's a consistency of a story that's being told there. Osiris being a black Central African, okay, and founding the colony of Kemet. Let's move on. As Aristotle said, those who are too black are cowards. For instance, like the Egyptians and Ethiopians. Once again, the Egyptians and the Ethiopians are being grouped together. Okay, they are being placed together as a single people. Why is that the case? And even more importantly, if the Egyptians were a consistent race with other Arabs, like all these people tried to say, like Orange Man here is trying to say, oh no, that dark orange toenail is coming from the north. Why can you not find any ancient historians saying, oh, the Egyptians are just like the Syrians? You know, the Egyptians are just like why do we not see that? Why do we all see so consistently the clustering of ancient Egyptians with the ancient Ethiopians? Why is that just a constant thread of behavior that we see in ancient Egypt? Why is that? Because they were seen as the same people. And there's a reason for that. Let's read this quote from Diodorus. And the larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are, they hold, Nubian. The original word is Ethiopian here because Nubian didn't exist back then. So the larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are Ethiopian. The colonists still preserving their ancient manners. For instance, the belief that their kings are gods. The very special attention which they pay to their burials. So we're talking about the same customs here, cultural continuity, and many other matters of a similar nature that are Ethiopian practices, while the shapes of their statues and the forms of their letters are Ethiopian. For of the two kinds of writing which the Egyptians have, that which is known as popular, that's the Demotic script, is learned by everyone, while that which is called sacred, that's our Medunetta script, is understood only by the priests of the Egyptians, who learnt it from their fathers as one of the things that are not divulged. But among the Ethiopians, everyone uses these forms of letters. So amongst Ethiopians, everyone was able to write and understand Medunetta. But amongst the Egyptians, it was reserved for the priestly class. Once again, we can see there is a consistent continuity and relatedness between the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Ethiopians / Kushite / Central Africans. They are seen as one and the other, one and the same. And that's really important to note, because this is a thread of discussion that is so often avoided when these people make these kind of like asinine race arguments or asinine arguments regarding, oh, well, they came from the Middle East and then they traveled here and then they did that. Okay, where is it? Where is the evidence of that? Where's the cultural continuity? What do they do that is like those people? What culture do they have? Because it's really important to know, not only are these ancient historians and you know, chroniclers writing down that the ancient Egyptians were black. Yes, we know they said that. We know they said they were black with woolly hair. And we know that argument isn't good enough for the anti-black Egypt detractors. But let's also focus on the fact that they said they, in all of their practices, were just like the Ethiopians. They were effectively the same as the Ethiopians. How do you argue against that? You can't argue against that. You can make asinine arguments about, oh, what does the word black mean? Well, the word melanchrois is used here and it's used to describe that. You can do all of that, but you can't argue against the fact that he's saying these people are essentially the same. Most of these people are saying the Ethiopians and the Egyptians basically do the same thing. Okay, they're not saying that the Egyptians do the same thing as all of those people who are north of Egypt.
Over the next millennium, these various chiefdoms would eventually merge into two separate regions, the Upper Kingdom in the south and the Lower Kingdom in the north. We don't know what these kingdoms were called, but we refer to this period as the Two Lands. Correct. While these were two distinct kingdoms, from the archaeological evidence, we can infer they were almost entirely of the same genetic makeup, as well as following largely the same religious practices and gods. And this period ends around 3150.
And here we go again. So we see in the conquering of Narmer here, he's shown Narmer's statue, which I'm sure anyone would agree that that is the face of an African person. And yet when he gets an opportunity to display this, he's showing one set of burnt orange people conquering another set of burnt orange people. This is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't even look like what is on the Narmer palette. In fact, let's just have a quick look at the Narmer palette whilst we're here, because we can't let these people. Do you notice how much they rely on their false reproductions? Do you know how much they rely on illustrations? And then if it's not illustrations, then it's one of the 6 statues that they pull out of that same one room in the Cairo Museum. That's literally it. And the Berlin bust. That's the entirety of their argument. They don't use the genuine art and the genuine artifacts. They avoid them like the plague. Why? Why do they avoid them like the plague? Because they know those genuine artifacts carry all of the evidence we need to basically say these were African people. Let's look at the Narmer palette together, because I mean, that's the easy thing to do. Once again, Old Kingdom statue. Let's just bask in the Africanity of this couple over here, whilst they focus on their fake statues. But anyway, let's have a look at the Narmer palette. Hopefully this is out. Open image in new tab. There we go. That's what I meant to do. Well, let me zoom. So let's look at the Narmer palette. All of the native people shown on the Narmer palette display African hair. You can see Narmer's sandal bearer there. Narmer himself looking very consistent with his statue, those features. The two people who are controlling the cephalopods, who I am absolutely sure this is a depiction of the Nile, okay, and the this ring representing the Isle of Meroe. I will prove that one day, I guarantee you. And these two bodies representing the bodies of the Great Lakes region. But I can't prove that, but I will prove it one day when I do an extended study on it. But look at their hair in afros. Okay, why didn't he show that? Why did he feel the need, rather than showing the actual Narmer palette, which I'm sure would have left nobody in doubt as to who these people are? Why did he instead decide to show you the illustration? Because they have to support. If he had just left this on the screen, that would have been sufficient, but that would have then also argued against the point that he was trying to make. So he supported this image with this to distract you, and this is what they do. He didn't need to include this. This didn't strengthen his argument whatsoever. He could have just literally carried on and had that on the screen and been honest, but he's thrown that in there because they need to support the real images, which are African, with the false images to push a narrative. It's a ridiculous thing to do. You know, I could show my Narmer reconstruction at this point, but I think that would be beleaguering the point. Yeah, I think we all know and agree what that Narmer looks like a typical a typical African. It actually looks very, very closer to me. Very, very much so. Well, we'll come on to that later.
50 BC, with a king in the south known as Narmer marching his way north and smiting the ruler of the opposing kingdom, thus unifying the two lands. From here, the pharaoh would become known as the ruler of the two lands. In the image of this unification, the tying of the lotus and papyrus flower would be depicted on pharaohs' thrones for the next 3,000 years. So at the time of Egypt's unification under a single ruler, the pharaoh, Egypt is as Egyptian as it's ever going to get, at least genetically speaking. We have very little evidence to...
What does that mean? Egypt is as Egyptian as it's ever going to get, at least genetically speaking. So he's talking about the founding of Egypt. Now we know the founding of Egypt under Narmer was a group coming from the south, merging with a group that was already based along the Nile. So we have a static, so to speak, African population along the banks of the Nile, and we have a southern population, which Narmer was a part of, because Narmer came from the south. I think that's agreed anthropologically by all. Yeah, agreed anthropologically by all that Narmer came from the south and conquered to form the two lands. So that's, to me, very simple discussion about who the two groups of people were. There's no need to introduce anything outside. Once again, we still haven't got substantial data that anything of this is coming from outside of the African continent. We don't have any data supporting that, or not a lot of data supporting that, at least. And notice here that he's chosen this mummy. I think this mummy is called Ginger, which I don't even believe, by the way. To be very clear, Ginger is like not mummified correctly, i.e. the skin's been exposed and partially decomposed, which kind of gives this look, this kind of like lucidermic look. But there's no evidence to even suggest Ginger, even though I'm not arguing, because we don't really know who Ginger is. That's what it is called them. Notice they called them Ginger because it's kind of like they want to give it the most non-black name possible, because they were so happy they found a mummy that they thought they could claim for themselves. He could have shown Nazlit Qatar here. He could have shown he could have shown other mummies, but he decided to show Ginger because Ginger's got a little tuft of ginger, not even ginger hair. It's kind of like this colored hair. Now I could show you images of, loads of people like the Beja people with this exact hair color and this exact hair texture. But I'm not even going to, because this is such a selective attempt to kind of say, well, look at the diversity. It's kind of like, well, that's one, the hair color here could be many things. We don't know. I don't know if the hair of Ginger has been tested yet, but we've talked expressively on this channel about so many different things. It could be eumelanin destabilization based on how much partial decomposition has happened with this mummy. That would be a very strong guess on my part. Once again, just exposure to the sun causes black hair to decolor, particularly over a 7,000 year period. It could be the practice of henna and indigo tin, which was used in the hair of Egyptians to color it, and is still used in Northeast Africa to this very, well, not even Northeast, East Africa to this very day amongst domestic populations. It could be so many things. But the point is that the only point I'm raising is that he's shown you this deliberately. Yeah, he's showing you this deliberately to try once again to throw this idea of this ambiguous, and he could have chosen different mummies, and he chose not to. It's very deliberate, and it's kind of like, really, is that the best we can do here?
Definitively determine what skin color these Egyptians had. However, judging from their origins in the Sahara, as well as limited but increasing trade connections with Mesopotamia, it's probably a safe assumption to say that Egyptians in 3000 BC had a darker skin color than they do today.
So once again, I'm confused again. Let's listen to what he just said there. Sorry to bring
single ruler, the pharaoh, Egypt is as Egyptian as it's ever going to get. at least genetically speaking. We have very little evidence to definitively determine what skin color these Egyptians had. However, judging from their origins in the Sahara, as well as limited but increasing trade connections with Mesopotamia, it's probably a safe assumption to say that Egyptians in 3000 BC had a darker skin color than they do today.
So he's saying because of trade with Mesopotamia. So I'm guessing he meant the first part. They originated in the Sahara, okay, and then they had increased trade with Mesopotamia, which that once again, that's overblown. You have to substantiate that. There's very little evidence that there was like vast interbreeding between the population of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. So that's a whole leap that you're making there. But let's even say that's true. Why would that make them darker? And if that was the case that they were darker, why have you been showing us all of these pale and orange people this entire time when you've been so if the darkness came from the Sahara, why were you not able to follow that through honestly with your AI imagery? Why didn't you show dark people in the Sahara? So you're saying they're darker, but everything that we're seeing now is lighter, even the modern Egyptians. So I don't understand there's nothing honest about the way this is being approached. It's so peculiar.
Although it would have certainly been lighter than their South African contemporaries on account that they would have had an increasing exposure to much lighter skinned people living along the greater Mediterranean.
When? You said it again. Oh, they definitely would have been lighter. Then, first of all, that's very definitive. Secondly, when did this interbreeding with the Mediterranean populations happen? Do you have proof of it? Why are there no gnomes along the coast of the Mediterranean if that was such a big part of their personality? Why were they happy to just stick along the Nile like all other African populations? Why did they feel no need to venture to the coastline? If they were so hell-bent on interbreeding with Mediterranean populations, why is that not reflected in any of their culture? Why is there no cultural carryover from the Mediterranean populations into ancient Egypt? Why are they so culturally aligned with the other populations of Africa and culturally distant from everybody else? That's not being answered here. It's just presumptions being made. Well, they would have been lighter because they would have interbred. That's presentism. You're thinking about the way the population looks now and trying to make it fit. There's nothing in the historical discourse that is supporting that line of thinking. That's just an assumption you're making. And yes, they would have gotten lighter after the years and years and years and years of invasion, but that would have been well after the establishment of what we know to be ancient Kemet.
And as we continue from the early dynastic period into the height of the Old Kingdom, migration into Egypt from the east begins to rapidly increase. And while I was walking through the Old Kingdom section of the Cairo Museum a couple of months ago, I was confronted with these shockingly vibrant...
Same ones again. Shockingly vibrant images. And can I just say this? I'm not going to be... Well, I am going to be horrible because I don't care. Rahatep and Nofret, and there's a few piece of artwork. Rahatep, Nofret, Hemeinu, the reserve heads, they're easily the worst piece of art that ever came out of ancient Egypt, and that's because they're fake. They don't look good. He said, all vibrant, like all of these Egyptologists do the same thing. Every time a ancient Egyptian statue gives them a little crumb of life that, it could, if you kind of squint one eye and don't look out of the other, it kind of looks like a white guy. When they see one of those statues, they talk about how realistic it is and this is the apex of ancient, and they'll pick any crap and say this. They actually say that about the reserve heads. The reserve heads, which are fake, by the way, the reserve heads are the worst. They are crap. I can say that with confidence. They are absolute crap. They do not look anywhere near as good as the genuine ancient Egyptian artwork, and let you waxing lyrical about it. It's absolutely ridiculous. Compare this ridiculous statue of Rahotep where he looks like a frigging cartoon, doesn't even look like a real human being. Compare this cartoon with the other Old Kingdom works. Let's say the actual pharaohs. Let's say Khafre enthroned, which even has a fake nose, but we'll go into that later. Or CG15 or CG41 statues of Khafre. Let's talk about the triad of Menkaure. Compare that, the detail on those, with this crap that he's put here, and he's waxing lyrical about how vibrant it is. It's ridiculous how much they praise these horrible fakes. And when you put them, let me, one second. Let's just do a comparison. So it doesn't sound like I'm just ranting, okay? If I can type, probably spelled that wrong. There we go. So let's do a comparison, and I want your honest opinion about which piece of art is better. So here's the Menkaure triad. Let me zoom in a bit. Let me zoom in. Yeah. Have a look at this. Look at the detail on this. Look at this beautiful piece of artwork and then compare it with this clad trap. Tell me which one is better. And I want your honest opinion. Tell me which one is better. Is this statue of Rahotep better, or is this statue better? Which one's better to you? Why is one, in the eyes of these people, seen as being, oh, look at this, oh, it's amazing, oh, so vibrant, and the other one just ignored? Because he doesn't want to accept what this one is portraying. He doesn't want to accept that. He doesn't want to have a discussion about the way this one looks. Okay? He wants to believe in his own, delusion. It's ridiculous.
And lifelike statues depicting sun-tanned men with red skin. It's clear that even this early on, Egyptians have become fully assimilated, with many lighter-skinned people migrating to the Nile to take advantage of this fertile land. By the end of the Old Kingdom, Egypt's economy began to collapse from a wide variety of factors, including uncontrolled immigration. And just to read you, here's an excerpt from Toby Wilkinson's book, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. The weakness of a hereditary monarchy, the threat posed by climate change, the dangers of uncontrolled immigration, and the unforeseen consequences of closer foreign ties all were brought home to the Egyptians in harsh lessons that would test their civilization to the breaking point. Now,
and by the way, Toby Wilkinson supports the fact that ancient Egypt's civilization was seeded along the Nile once again. Okay, seeded along the Nile and not far from the current location of Upper Egypt. That's what he believes. It's very unanimous in terms of the historians that understand this, and yet the continual need to try and push and a false narrative of continuous interbreeding and light-skinnedness that came from the Mediterranean. I find it bizarre.
Now, this would begin a trend in Egypt's history, where these massive influxes or invasions of foreigners would, in some cases, dramatically change the makeup of Egyptian society, notably beginning with the Hyksos invading around 16...
Correct. So this is where we start to agree with each other. Okay, yes, the Hyksos did invade, and yes, we did start to see mass migrations coming from outside of ancient Egypt into Egypt by people who were invading. That is entirely true. I'm not going to argue with that. And that would have affected the makeup of the population. It would have been a gradual change, but it would have affected the makeup of the population. I actually agree with that.
50 BC, bringing mass amounts of new settlers onto Egypt's banks, as well as new technologies from the Levant, including the horse-drawn chariot, which was an iconic mark of the Bronze Age. Then around 750 BC, the Nubians, who had been living under the boot of Egypt for nearly 2,000 years, rose up in...
Yeah, see, I'm not going to let you get away with that crap. I'm not going to let you get away with that crap. And this is what you call, this is proper Eurocentrism here. And once again, this might not be his fault. I know people think I'm being light on him, but it's not. It might not be his fault, because this is something that's been peddled with such ferocity by Egyptologists. The idea of Nubia living under the boot of Egypt. First of all, let's get it straight. There was no Nubia. Okay? The word Nubia comes from the ancient Egyptian word Nub, where we get the word Neb. Same word, Nub, Neb, which they used to describe gold, and they used to say someone was a lord. And they actually had almost the same symbol in when it was used for gold, you saw a smelting pot on top of a kind of like on top of stands, and when it was used for lord, you just had the pan, and the pan symbolized the holder of the wealth, which is why they used the pan, i.e. the pan that holds the gold, which is why they used the pan to represent the word nub or neb, to represent someone who is a lord or a leader. The word lord actually meant one who, you know, who controls the wealth, who distributes wealth, one who provides sustenance. So there's layers, there's kind of like polysemic layers for each ancient Egyptian word. Okay, so we have the word nub, okay, which is the indigenous word for gold. Now what happened is the Arabs started calling the native Egyptians Nubia, okay, because they liked gold. Okay, they used to adorn themselves in gold, so they called them Nubia. Ia is always used to basically say land of. So the Ia suffix is to basically say land of. So Nubia would be land of gold, which is where you first had the term Nubian being used. Actually, I'm not even sure if it was the Arabs. I think it was before the Arabs. So it might have been the Greeks. I'll get that correctly. But either which way, it wasn't a term that was coined during the time of ancient Egypt. There was no Nubians. This would have been Kush. The 25th dynasty was the Kushite dynasty, not the Nubian dynasty. Okay. Nubia was a word that was attached to people from Tar Seti, and Tar Seti is and always was, the land of the bow is and always was a part of Kemet. I say this over and over again. Tar Seti was the first nome of Kemet. The people of Tar Seti, who are now called Nubians, were a part of Kemet. They weren't a part of Kush. They weren't Kushites. They were ancient Egyptians. They were Kemetic people. Those dark-skinned bowmen that everyone says, oh, well, you got the Nubian, you got the Egyptian infantry, and then you've got the Nubian bowmen. Incorrect. Incorrect. The bowmen are a part of Tar Seti. Tar Seti, land of the bow, or as I was corrected by Smash Rockwell the other day, he said it's actually more correctly be maybe land of the shooters or land of the archers. Okay. Tar Seti, land of the bow or land of the archers, whatever you want to call it, was a part of ancient Egypt. So let me just quickly pull up the image of Egyptian, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to say Egyptian bowmen statuettes. Let's hope this brings up. This might not even come up for Egyptian because people will say, yeah. So this image over here, people have always assumed this image to be an image of Kushites because look, oh, they're dark skinned and they're holding bows. Nope, those are people from Tar Seti. Tar Seti, land of the shooters, is the first nome of Kemet. So these are ancient Egyptians, and you also have the Egyptian infantry. So I'm going to put statuettes. You also have the Egyptian infantry statuettes shown here. Okay. Sorry. Open image in new tab. You also have the Egyptian infantry shown here. Okay. By the way, notice how no one likes to use these images. Let's just pretend these images don't exist while we push our orange race theories. Okay. No, the delusional Africans. Oh, the Egyptians weren't black. The Egyptians weren't black. Well, if they weren't, then why is their entire infantry? Oh, they're not black. They're brown. Do you see what's going on here, guys? Yeah, clearly, yeah. I mean, you couldn't get any more African than this. Yeah, afros and everything, and the bowmen, these dark-skinned ones. Yeah, these very dark, near to black, chocolate brown men, also Egyptians. Tar Seti. Okay, and maybe some other part of Kemet there. Both of them representing ancient Egypt. The land of the bow is a part of Egypt, to be clear, the first nome. And it's important that we start picking up, because the Egyptologists have gotten away far too long with separating Tar Seti from Egypt. And we must challenge them on this, because it's incorrect. I see no evidence to suggest that Tar Seti was not just like the other nomes, which had the same determinative used after them. No one is saying people from Tar Seti aren't from Egypt. It's like saying people from Waset aren't from Egypt, or people from Men Nefer weren't from Egypt. Oh, they're not Egyptians, they're Thebans. They're not Egyptians, they're Memphites. No one says that. So why is it when it comes to the people of Tar Seti, so, oh, they're not Egyptians, they're Nubians? Okay, why okay? It's not okay. These are all Egyptians, so it must be stated, okay? And let's be clear, guys, yeah? All black, regardless if they're slightly lighter or slightly darker, okay? All black. So just to address that Kushites under the boot of Egypt remark that he made, this is once again a ridiculous exaggeration. In fact, the most negative Egyptians would ever be really about Kushites is to say we're limiting immigration. That's as harsh as the Egyptians really got with the Kushites. Yeah, we're limiting immigration. All right, we don't want any more coming in for now. All right, these cities are too full, too much this and that going on, whatever. We already know that throughout Egypt, people had Kushite names. We have Kushite names. So we have Kushite names in the 18th dynasty. Tia or Taya is believed to be a Kushite name or an Ethiopian name, whatever you want to call it. Many of the royals intermarry. Like there's so much gray area between where Kush ends and where Kemet started. It's unbelievable. And yet they will try and push this narrative. Oh, Egypt had Kush under the boot, had absolute nonsense. The most they would do normally is just restrict immigration. Like I said, when it came to who they had under the boot and who they would write vile things about, watch what they write about the Asiatics. Okay, they literally hated the Asiatics, and that's where you'll see Egypt being their most belligerent in their works, not towards the Kushites. Okay, in fact, going back to that earlier discussion we had about this interchange between Egypt and Ethiopia, I've mentioned earlier, but one of the main deity in it, well, I say deity, but you know what I mean, Neja, whatever you want to call them, you know, ancestor, we know is Amen. Okay, so Amen was one of the major ancestors. I will continue to push and will continue to state to people that Amen, who still, by the way, is still relevant in Central Africa, still relevant in Central and East Africa, and even Southern Africa. The name Amen is throughout. It was throughout the Kushite dynasties. All of the rulers were named Amani, which was just Amen. Once again, just a different way of pronouncing Amen. That the Amen was a Kushite deity. I have to express that. They knew Amen to be a Kushite dynasty. There's Egyptian. I will just quickly find that for you. Let me give you the exact text. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to pull this up because it's important that you see the exact text here. So this will take 1 second, guys. I just want to give you a nice full screen image of this. Cool. And I'll just increase the font size. Be 1 second, guys. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I appreciate it. But I just want to give you this quote because this is quite important, actually. Yeah, I'll do. Come on, stop loading. Hurry up. There we go. Okay. So just really quickly, just to let you know where this piece of text is from. This comes from a 7th century Demotic text. Okay. And let's just quickly read this quote. It's a bit longer than this, but I just want to read this quote to you. It says, Amen. Okay. The bull of Meroe, my God, curse you. Okay. This entire story, which I'm not going to read through, basically is a battle between an Egyptian and Egyptian priests versus Kushite priests. And the Egyptians throughout the battle acknowledge and understand that Amen is a Kushite deity and he's going to favor the Kushites. This is an Egyptian text, okay, and they understand that Amen is a Kushite deity who's going to favor the Kushites. I have to stress that. And this is why you see Amen still being preserved throughout Africa. Someone mentioned Imana. It's preserved in different ways, but you see it being preserved throughout Africa because that's where it originated. And this was ancient Egypt's most significant deity. So you have all of this continuity from Central Africa into ancient Kemet, which they're not picking up. Where was their Eastern deity? Someone answer me that question. That should be an easy enough one question. If you're going to inherit anything, if you're going to argue there was a direction of influence, you should be able to show me quite easily an Eastern deity and say, well, actually, they worshipped, where is it? Because all I see is African deities. Bez, another African deity. All of the deities that were worshipped in ancient Egypt were of African origin. And this is the issue. They don't have these kinds of continuities, which is why they have to make vague arguments about, boats and coastal regions and, settling. And then there was definitely intermingling and all this stuff. And they use words and superlatives to really push something that's, I wouldn't even say less than certain, something that just basically has no evidence to support it.
Invaded and conquered Egypt. Ruling for a century, the Nubian pharaohs must have dramatically increased the population of dark-skinned Nubian people living within Egypt. And shortly after this period, Egypt experienced a succession of invasions, including the Assyrians between 675 and 600 BC, the Persians between 525 and 332 BC, and the Greeks from 332 until the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC.
Okay, and there already you have now started to build up a plausible backstory for the changing of the population. Notice before those invasions that he's just started mentioning now, we don't have really any strong evidence of outside admixture apart from the Hyksos invasion. Okay, now if you lived in a logical world and you weren't trying to push a non-black agenda, you would simply accept the fact that the Egyptians were African, probably exactly like all of the other Africans, and then they started undergoing invasions from the 26th dynasty onwards from people who were not African, from people who were outside Africa. If you had come with that discussion and then said from that point onwards they would have had lots of gene flow, they would have been mixed, I would have been totally on board with this, because that to me is what we have the evidence for. But you've tried to argue mix from the start, but not had any sources of what they were mixing with other than other Africans. And no one from Africa is arguing that Africans aren't mixed. I always say all Africans are mixed. Yeah, we all mixed with each other. Okay, all Africans are mixed with other Africans. There's so much gene flow in Africa, it's unbelievable. It's what creates that massive genetic diversity we have. There's been so much, and it continues to be so much genetic movement throughout Africa. Okay, Africa historically borderless and just had so much of that movement. All right, no one's arguing that we're not mixed. What we're saying is we are African, and Africans definitely fit within kind of like phenotypic ranges that make us quite distinctive from people who are non-African, who all happen to carry Neanderthal DNA, by the way.
These are centuries upon centuries of people from the greater Mediterranean world, as well as east of Egypt, moving into Egypt and dramatically diversifying its genetic makeup. And furthermore, many of the sites that you may visit today if you go to Egypt were in fact erected during these later periods of foreigners ruling over Egypt, such as the Temple of Dendera, Philae, and Edfu. All of these were created under the Greek dynasty known as the Ptolemies.
And that's absolutely fine. This is where you should have started your argument. This would have made much more sense. I absolutely am fine with the points that you're making here. Yes, there definitely was foreign influence, but what we need to be very clear about is when that started. To be clear, if I turned around, and this is where the kind of the racial argument comes in, which is really important that we kind of make very, very clear. If I turn around and I say to you, Nigeria is a black nation, I'm sure no one will argue with me. Okay, Nigeria is a black nation. Yeah, I'm sure no one will argue with me. Now, but me saying Nigeria is a black nation, and am I saying each and every person that ever was in Nigeria for its history has been black? Absolutely not. In fact, if you go to Nigeria now, to our shame, we have a Lebanese superclass in Nigeria. It's very embarrassing. Okay, Lebanese superclass in Nigeria who literally, are, have got a lot of influence and a lot of power. Now, if I was to work like the Eurocentrists work, and how, all due respect, this, Luke, this is how you're working at the moment in this video, you would take that Lebanese influence and you would use that to make an argument that Nigeria was a mixed nation. Oh, Nigeria is a mixed nation. You can see here the Lebanese blah, blah influence. Oh, the Lebanese traders. No, they are not a part of the indigenous people. They are not the indigenous Nigerians. Nigerians know who Nigerians are. Ancient Kemetic people knew who they were. People could come later and invade and mix and take positions just like the Lebanese are doing in Nigeria at the moment. But we know who Nigerians are. This is the point we're making. So we're not trying to say, it was impossible for other people to come in, to cross in, to set up shop, to become part of the culture, to be invited in. All of these things are absolutely possible, but it doesn't stop us from knowing who the core people, who the indigenous people are, irrespective of all the different ethnicities that exist in Nigeria. Nigerians know who Nigerians are. And that's exactly the same. In Kemet, you would have had all the different ethnicities. Look at the difference between the Tarsetian bowmen and the Egyptian infantry. Look at the difference in complexion and slight different in phenotype that they had. Those are both black people, but they were, in my view, different ethnicities. They maybe didn't even speak the same language. Very, very possible. People got this idea that Egypt had one unified language. I don't believe this to be the case. I I believe you had dialects all throughout ancient Kemet. And this is where obviously more study needs to be done by African scholars. But I think we're going to start unpicking that and start revealing some of these truths about ancient Kemet. But the point being that Africans know who Africans are, and the existence of other people within Africa don't make them African. Just to be clear, South Africa, another good example. Okay, the Africans know who the Africans are, and they know who the non-Africans are, who the Europeans are. Okay.
So now that you understand where the ancient Egyptians come from, who they are, who they chose to or were forced to intermingle with, you can hopefully get a sense that ancient history is far from simple. And for anyone to make a blanket statement about an ancient civilization saying, oh, they were black or oh, they were white, it's just a gross oversimplification and is...
No, it's not. It's not a gross oversimplification. Okay, it's a gross oversimplification in this case because you're arguing a presentist argument. Okay, it's not gross over. In fact, the one thing that your evidence did was prove that, because all you've done for this entire live stream is prove that the ancient Egyptians are made up of native Africans from different parts of Africa. You've proven that. That's what the crux of this entire video was, and you're too blind to see that you've proved the point. You're blinded by your own AI and Photoshop. Your own AI blinded you because you said, oh, these people were migrating from from the Sahara, and these ones migrated from the Sahel, and these ones migrated from the Great Lakes region. That was your data that proved that. Yeah, all of these different Africans migrated to the Nile Valley, and yet you decided that you will drag and drop orange people there. Why did you do that? You didn't need to do that. If you approach this in a logical and honest way, you would have said, well, these people coming from the Sahara were likely black. These people coming from here were likely black. We've already proven that all Europeans, all these basal Eurasians, they were essentially black. The Natufians were essentially Nigerians. Like there's no need for all of this mental gymnastics and trying to make the modern ethnography of North Africa fit ancient Egypt. It doesn't need to. Modern North Africa looks that way because of the Circassian slave trade. That is the largest contributor, and obviously the Ottoman expansion, but largely because of the Circassian slave trade, which over time and which ran right up until the late 1800s, has brought in masses of people from Europe and from the Western Asian steppes region into Africa over thousands of years and brought that gene flow in. And that's why it's gradually turned to look the way that it does. Okay, there's no kind of like secret or rocket science about it. It's very traceable, very easy to understand history if you want to look at it. Okay, I want to give a big shout out to Ikramuddin Zwane. Said you should save those images from Google before they get colorized, like the Minoan ones that used to depict black people. I managed to save them. That's very true. That's very true. We do that as much as possible. Save and circulate images that are genuine as much as possible, because they will colorize, they will deface everything. Look at the statue of Sobekm Kaf. Okay, I mean Sobekm Saf that we recently uncovered. Imagine if someone hadn't saved that image. Imagine if Robin Walker hadn't made that excellent book. Actually, someone sent me the origin. It was Kapruki, actually. Kapruki contacted me and he sent me the origin of that image. Do you know? In fact, I'm gonna share with you what Kapruki sent me, because this will hit you hard. Let me show you something really quickly. I'm sure Kapruki won't mind me sharing this with you, because this was wild when he sent this to me. By the way, if you're not subscribed to Kapruki's channel, you're missing out. That channel's bad. But let me quickly find his message that he sent me, because I want to share this with you guys. So Kapruki sent me this. Will it let me open it as a tab? Yeah. Kapruki sent me this. So this is the statue of Sobekm Saf with his nose looking exactly like my nose. But check this out. Yeah. First of all, it says that he's in the 13th dynasty, which I find very peculiar, and they give him a different name. But this is how it arrived at the British Museum. This image was taken allegedly at the British Museum. So that means the British Museum are responsible for this. The British Museum are responsible for removing his nose. And they also decided to change his dynasty, which I find peculiar. Because actually looking at him, it does kind of fit kind of like the Middle Kingdom. It does kind of fit the Middle Kingdom quite a lot, especially those big legs. That's something that you saw with Mentuhotep. So it does kind of fit Middle Kingdom style artwork quite a bit. So I'm not even sure if this is Sobekm Saf as they say this is. Maybe they just chose that name after they had finished defacing it. But the bottom line is this is how it arrived at the British Museum. So yeah, let that one hit you. But yeah, so yeah, respect to Kapruki for sending me that information, simultaneously breaking my heart. But yeah, there you go. All right, let's carry on.
Honestly, just an ignorant thing to say, which I really think is the root of this problem. In the modern Western world, people tend to place way too much importance on the color of someone's skin than they should, and they certainly place more importance on it in the modern world than people of the ancient world did. In the past, it was more about culturalism. If you didn't subscribe to the predominant culture, religion, and language, you were seen as an other or an.
So this is peculiar because now he's making good points. I like the points he's making now, but he doesn't realize he's completely contradicting himself because he's the one who's decided to embark on a "What Race Were the Ancient Egyptians" video and try to disprove Black Egypt and push an orange Egypt narrative. So you're, in doing that, making a big deal about race, because you could have ended this video as quickly as you said it, as quickly as you started it, and said, okay, well, ancient Egyptians were likely all races, because you kind of see it represented everywhere. But instead, what you've tried to do is push a racial narrative. So it's kind of like contradiction there, you know?
An outsider. So to answer the ever-looming question, the Egyptians were not black, they were not white, they were Egyptians.
And that's the stupid argument that modern Egyptians make. They weren't black, they weren't white, they were just Egyptians. What does that mean? That's making, oh, Nigerians aren't black. Nigerians aren't black, we're Nigerians. What are we talking about? It's a stupid argument. The ancient Egyptians were like modern Africans. That's the point that is being raised here. Africa is the only place where you don't have to create a false, non-existent race for all of the ancient Egyptian data, anthropology, artwork to fit. You don't need to do anything. Hey, look, this population has exact limb proportions, exact craniometrics, exact skin color, exact hair texture, exact culture of the ancient Egyptians, but we're going to basically say that they're not them because they're black and we don't want them to be black. It's ridiculous. You guys, meanwhile, are fabricating races, pulling races out of your butt. 1 minute there, a sunburnt red. 1 minute there, toasty. What did he say? Burnt orange. Burnt orange. Sorry, let's just do this for shizzles and giggles. Burnt orange. So in his mind, there's a race of people who had this skin color, yeah? This skin color. They no longer exist, but these are the people that traveled in from the Middle East. Yeah. The burnt orange. Like, come on, man, you're doing too much. You don't need to do all that. I just showed you what the Egyptian infantry looked like. Yeah? They look burnt orange to you. Do you know how many statuettes there are just like this? Do you know how many there are? There are literally dozens of these Egyptian villager statuettes, and they all have this complexion. That's my complexion, by the way. Yeah, they all have this complexion. All of them. These people aren't sunburned. These people are not sunburned orange. Okay. This is the color of the ancient Egyptians when it's not faded. Okay, let's just be real. Let's approach this with honesty. Okay. Egyptian villager. Notice I'm just Googling. I don't have to like pick and choose like these guys do, these Eurocentrists do. I can just Google stuff and put it on the screen because I know it's always going to come up African. Ain't that hard. Okay. Egyptian villagers. Let me type in Egyptian villagers statuette. Don't want illustrations, thank you very much. I want the real deal. Okay. I wish I'd done my one. Why isn't it showing the Egyptian villagers? I mean, I could show any of these. Look at these Old Kingdom statues, but I'm not going to go into these right now. I want to specifically show villagers, statuettes. Let me put S in the end. That normally brings it up. What am I typing in wrong? I mean, I'm pulling up loads of nice statues that I could actually share with you. But let me just quickly, I want to show you specifically because I'm not going to search right now. Did I spell villages wrong? Someone said try Villiers. Am I honest? Now you're spelling villages wrong. So, models. Okay, let me try models. Yeah, models might work better. No, that isn't working. Let me try ancient. I'll give up in a second. Ancient Egyptian villages. I'm going to type in statuettes. Nah, it's not pulling it up. That's a bit irritating. Maybe they've started Google suppressing them because they're too black. No, I'm not going to find them right now. Well, basically, you'll find loads and loads of statues. Yeah, this is an example of one. And they all look like this. They all just look like African. But in fact, there you go. I've clicked on one and it's kind of led to another. Okay, this is what you see. Yeah. Do we have to have a debate? Do we really, really, really have to have a debate about whether or not these people are African or if they're sunburnt? Do we really have to have that debate? Do we? Because if we do, we're just in a really stupid place. I think we can all agree that they're not burnt orange. Yeah. I think we can all agree that they have African hairstyles. They're farming African cattle and they look African. They're wearing African robes. They're walking around with bare African feet. It's like, what more can we do in this discussion to get a reasonable discourse going on?
Which is an amalgamation of people living within and around the Nile. This would have encompassed people that we may call today black or white, as well as...
No, why would it encompass people who were called white? I haven't seen any evidence of that. You have to show me the evidence. Why? Show me the white statue or statuette, yeah, with the blonde hair, or even not the blonde hair, the brunette hair, whatever you want to call it, yeah, the brown hair. Show me it. Show me. I don't see it, so I'm not going to start saying, no, you're right. It's just going to be a mix of, whites and blacks. No, it wasn't. It just wasn't. I'm sorry. Okay. Even your own science, like I proved earlier, says that all people, even people in Europe, were all black up until 3,000 years ago. He said they all were. All. Didn't say some. All Europeans were dark skinned until 3,000 years ago. That's what the article said. So why would Africa, of all places, the hottest place, be where the whites were at? Is that where they were chilling and then they migrated into Europe in 1000 BC? The whites left Africa and went. Does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense.
Everything in between. Now, getting more pedantic, people may say, well, sure, later on, Egypt could have been occupied or populated by the Hyksos or the Persians or the Greeks, but I'm talking about the Egyptians that built the pyramids and built the Sphinx. Well,
yes, that's what we're talking about.
Sure, if you want to look at the Old Kingdom of Egypt exclusively, sure, Egypt would not have been as heavily populated by foreigners during this time. But they still depict themselves in color, and we can see from hundreds of examples of wall reliefs and statues, they have a lighter reddish-brown
What is he looking at here?
complexion. They would not have met the modern standard of what we would consider black or white.
What is he looking at here? I thoroughly don't understand. Okay, look. This is what I'm talking about. I don't know if it's like, what's the alternative phrase for selective mutism? What was like, but you're being selectively blind. What's selective blindism? Because that's what he's suffering from here. Goodness me. This is the tomb that he's looking at, by the way. Yeah. This is the tomb that he's looking at. Now, we can all agree that this is faded. Okay. This one looks slightly like it's been restored, but let's just have a look at these central figures. Okay. We can all agree that reddish brown was the target color here. Okay. It's a deep brown. There's not a whole bunch of people that can access that color. Even this faded version, bear in mind, everything we're looking at here would have faded substantially. This is still a skin color that is accessible. Even in its faded form, this skin color is still accessible to black people. Okay. Why? What argument is he making here? I'm sorry. Let's just zoom right in. What argument is he making regarding the race of these people? Everything about them is African. Someone just said, look, afros, African, all of them are African hairstyle. These would have been locks. Okay, these are all, there's your Kemetic short twist. All that's happened is these have been faded drastically. The original color would have been a deep, dark brown. Deep, dark brown. It's not that difficult. Okay, why is he trying to argue that this is something different? Oh, they're not white or black. Well, no, they're African. And they definitely would, because there are many people in Nubia who have lighter skin color than this. Many people in Nigeria that have lighter skin color than this. These are Africans. There's no argument to be had here. You can't act as a white person, or you're not going to access these kind of colors, this kind of deep richness. This is what you see in modern African people.
They were just Egyptians, and they had an ancient Egyptian skin color. And anyone who says otherwise is either intentionally...
They had an ancient Egyptian skin color. Notice he hasn't referenced it once. He does an entire video about the race of the ancient Egyptians, but he's not able to reference what that looks like in modern time. Ancient Egyptian skin color, he says. Is that it? Is that what, does he really think there were, Cheeto people walking around? Is that what he actually thinks? I don't understand this. I don't understand what's going on here. They were an ancient Egyptian skin color. And if you don't agree, then you're just crazy. My friend, do you know how many Africans have that skin color? Let's not even go far. Let's not even go far from modern Egypt. Let's just keep it right in the nation. Okay, let's keep it right in the nation. Gorgeous Nubian couple. Oh, won't let me zoom. That's annoying. It's a bit small. Go for a bigger one. Let's go for this pair of Nubians here. Okay, couple of Nubians, yeah. These are relatively light, maybe slightly mixed Nubians here. I don't know, but let's, just for the sake of argument, because this actually will prove the point. These people would still be phenotypically classified amongst modern African black people. Still be phenotypically classified as among modern black people. And yet they are considerably, one second, where's your, oh no, it's all down here. Where's it gone? There you go, sorry. And yet they are considerably lighter than the image you've shown us. Okay, these people are lighter than the image that you've shown us, and they're black. Let's go for some moderate Nubians there. These people are almost exactly, this is a typical African color, by the way, these people have. Open a new tab. Okay. And these people are pretty much exactly the same tone. Exactly the same tone as what you see there. Okay. There's not any mental gymnastics that are required for us to prove our point about who the ancient Egyptians were. And that's just me using one ethnicity of people who happen to be very close by right now. Okay, we can't continue to have this discourse of people who are intellectually dishonest and who will essentially say, unless they were painted using charcoal and tar, that they're not black. Just because we use the word black to describe the modern day race being a modern social construct, it doesn't mean that people were literally the color black. The color brown belongs to the black race. Okay, let me restate that. The color brown belongs to the black race by and large, to be clear. Let me just give a couple shout outs. I've had a couple of donations. I really appreciate it. Make sure I missed any. Well, you guys have been busy in the chat. Busy. Can't even find my donations. Rotted. Okay, here you go. Deshaun said, he's saying since they're not painted true black, they are not black. Idiotic. Agree. And we've heard this argument so many times, it gets so boring. And literally, that's literally what I just said. So I agree with that. And Bronze Beauty said, loving this, great work. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We're getting to the end now anyway, so I'm going to let it kind of play and just wrap up now because it's getting kind of late. So let's just quickly let it play.
Lying, or they're just ignorant of everything that makes up ancient Egypt, the Egyptian people, and their history. So
what we've proven is that we're not lying. The dishonesty definitely is coming from your direction. So you can't tell us that anyone who doesn't agree is just lying. No, we're showing you real life examples. We're showing you far more artwork than what you've been willing to dive into. We're showing you features, we're showing you skin color, and we're showing you continuity between modern African populations, none of which you've done. You've had to create a race, a burnt orange race of people that don't exist anymore because it was the ancient Egyptian race, which has got nothing to do with any modern race. So they obviously went extinct, like they went the way of the dodo. Yeah, the burnt orange people went the way of the dodo, according to you.
Here's a question I see sometimes. People will say, well, why does it matter? Why don't you just let people believe what they're going to believe, and what's the harm in it? Well, why does it matter? Why does it matter what skin color or race the ancient Egyptians were? Well, it matters as much as the truth matters to you. The truth serves to give us an accurate reflection and account of our world. If you allow people to continually perpetuate
and this is the thing, this is where it starts, this is where the gaslighting begins. It matters because the truth matters, but as we saw, there's very little in regards to the subject of race that he said that is true. He's fabricated a race of burnt orange people that no longer existed. He's said statues and artworks that have exactly the same skin tone as modern black populations don't look black, almost like he's not aware of the phenotypic diversity of black people. He's totally avoided touching on any real royal artwork, i.e. kings, queens, pharaohs. He hasn't touched on any of those, and to serve his agenda has basically promoted the idea using 6 statues that are fake and said they were burnt orange even though they weren't. All of this honesty is coming from one direction. It's not coming from, it's gaslighting to accuse people like myself, people in the black community, who just point out to you, these are Africans, mate. Were all of the ancient Greeks lying when they said that the Ethiopians, i.e. the Central Africans, and the Egyptians were essentially the same people? Is Aristotle a liar? Is Herodotus a liar? Is Diodorus a liar? Were all of the eyewitnesses who said what they looked like, were they all liars? Were they all delusional? Were the ancient Egyptians themselves liars when they said that they inherited their gods from Central Africa, from the Nubians, from Meroe, were all these people conspiracy theorists, all these people conspiring to make ancient Egypt seem African? Were they anthropologists lying when they measured the Egyptian skulls and they said, you know, they were essentially had a 70% rate of dolichocephaly, which can only be found amongst African populations? Were they lying when their facial and their cranial features completely matched modern day East Africans? Was that a lie as well? Was the ancient Egyptian beanhead, is that something that you think Europeans have? Is that something you think modern Egyptians have? Because they don't. What about the limb proportions? Is that a lie? How many lies need to be told for Black Egypt to fit this perfectly? How much data has to be misconstrued? Was the autosomal DNA of the pharaonic lineage that lined them up with South Africa and the Great Lakes region, was that a lie as well? There comes a point where you have to reassess your belief systems, reassess that which you've been taught, and be willing to admit that you were wrong.
Falsehood, or treated as though it isn't significant enough to matter, it will eventually become significant enough to matter. The Greek philosopher Plato, for instance, writes in Book 9 of the Republic, "Is it any surprise then that those who are inexperienced in the truth also have unsound opinions about lots of other things as well?"
Wow. The irony is how much that quote has gone over your head. Okay, as an African, hearing someone of European persuasion read that quote and not understand the irony of it is that's something. Okay, those who are inexperienced in truth. Who was it? Wasn't it the Egyptians who called the Greeks babes? Yeah, said they're babies. They're trying to do things that we've been doing for thousands of years. Okay, this is what Plato's getting at here. Yeah, inexperienced in truth. You are inexperienced in truth. You don't get to lecture Africans about what the truth is. Respectfully.
So this excerpt comes from a Socratic dialogue recorded by Plato, where Socrates is detailing how people with no exposure to the truth cannot possibly perceive the truth, which gives them a warped sense of reality. And I think this is what happens when some people hear this idea of black or white Egypt without having any prior knowledge of the real evidence behind who the Egyptians were, as well as where they came from and how they depicted themselves. It's impossible for these people who believe these things to be able to perceive the truth when they haven't even encountered it yet. And this gives their brain a warped sense of the ancient past. And when a large number of people have a warped sense of reality, this can have a potentially significantly negative implication in the long term.
All of this is just incredibly ironic. Okay, incredibly ironic. And this is where I think, I mean, he gives a speech at the end, and it sounds like there's a semblance of integrity there, where I actually believe that this is why I think that he might be just misled by the information he's been given. Okay, and then when people believe something that's incorrect and they try and enforce it with the data, I'm sure he's been searching around while he was making this and thinking to himself, oh my god, there's actually not that much evidence that these people are well, they don't look Arab. And that's kind of why he's probably settled on his burnt orange thing, because he's realized, actually, bro, I was expecting to see a whole lot more cream. I was looking for a whole lot more cream. There ain't much cream coming out of ancient Egypt. They're all this brown color. And that's why he's had to make brown burnt orange in his head. He's trying to make it all make sense. My friend, stop fighting logic. Okay? Stop fighting logic. Stop fighting the truth, as you like to call it. The truth is looking you dead in the eye. Okay? You've touched on the truth many times today, but you've just basically been adding 2 plus 2 and making 466. Okay, you've been coming nowhere near the right answer. Okay, Occam's razor will guide you, my friend. You know that the ancient Egyptians are an African race. I'm sure you can open your eyes up and see that that's what you've proven to yourself, but you're fighting against it. I welcome you to respond to this, by the way, if you manage to sit through 3 hours of this round.
And this is why the truth must be defended, protected, and is inherently valuable, whether it's popular or not. In another excerpt from Plato, Crito, a close friend of Socrates, is expressing to Socrates his concern about Socrates choosing to remain in Athens when he is to be executed on counts of impiety and corrupting the youth, rather than fleeing into exile to preserve his life. And in response to this, Socrates, knowing that choosing to flee the city in exile would be to disgrace himself as a citizen of Athens, he says to Crito, and forgive me, it's dense reading here, but I think that the sentiment is very poignant and rings true. Do we say that one must never in any way do wrong willingly, or must do wrong in one way and not in another? Is to do wrong never good or admirable, as we have agreed in the past, or have all these former agreements been washed out during the last few days? Have we at our age failed to notice for some time that in our serious discussions we were no different from children? Above all, is the truth such as we used to say it was, whether the majority agreed or not? So that's a bit long-winded, but what I'm getting at here is Socrates chose to acknowledge the unpopular truths, even at the expense of his own.
Well, you've done the exact opposite, because you've gone for the popular truth. In fact, all you've done is taken the mainstream opinion and amplified it. You've gone for the narrative that you've been sold as a child, growing up, watching the media, watching Ben-Hur, watching all this crap, which showed you a miscellaneous race coming out of the Middle East and therefore linking to ancient Egypt. Actually, the unpopular truth in this would have been for you to explore the claims made by native Africans who say, hey, that civilization there, that's one of ours. That civilization there, we still do these things. We still practice these things. That civilization there, those statues look like us. You could have explored that. That would have put you on the side of the unpopular truth. We, as Black Africans who understand ancient Egypt as a Black African civilization, are on the side of unpopular truth. You don't get to talk from the mainstream perspective with lazy scholarship and lazy research and then place yourself on the side of integrity and, intellectual uprightness and pretend as though you are coming from the place of, this is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard for you people to hear this, but the ancient Egyptians weren't Black or white. They were Egyptians. Oh, round of applause. Oh my God, you're so magnanimous. Oh, how brave of you to say something so flipping vanilla. My friend, you're not doing anything that is in any way impressive here. Yeah, this is lazy. What you should have done is done your homework, and you would have come out with far more than what you've managed to put together here. Let me just give a quick shout out to Jonathan Waters for your $5 donation. Thank you, bro. Show them, I'm sure I'm supposed to say show them the Negede Wioto mummy. Okay, I might pull that up actually. Since you've given a donation, you sidetracked me. Let's do that. Negede Woyoy. Woyo is like a Caribbean term, Jamaican term. Negede. Okay, you have to send that to me because it's not pulling up. That just came up with nothing. Or maybe you got to spell it again. Discord me. And I got another one as well. Let me give shout out to Nerd Large for your $4.99 donation. They trade in projection, deception, and subjection. Keep exposing their blatant, shameful revisionism. I will. And thank you for that donation. I appreciate it, and I agree with everything you just said there. It's just, I think ignorance I'd put in the front of that though. I really do think sometimes this is ignorance. I don't know, something about this guy's energy, as wrong as he is, something about his energy tells me he's not deliberately being anti. I think he just really believes something and doesn't have the bravery to revise his position. But maybe he'll see this and he'll see he's made some errors.
Own life. And even when he had the option to disgrace himself as an Athenian by fleeing the city, he chose not to, because as a citizen of Athens, he felt compelled to abide by the decision of the city to execute him. And more than 2,000 years later, the names of the members of the Athenian court who voted in favor of his execution have been lost to history. And so too, probably with Socrates' name, had he been influenced by a popular crowd to silence himself or not acknowledge the unpopular truth. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like to learn more about ancient Egyptian or ancient Greek history, well, please like and subscribe for more.
Okay, that was long, but I think worthwhile. You guys know when I like to do these reaction videos, I like to watch them through so people can't accuse me of taking people out of context. I think we can all agree that the arguments that were raised weren't difficult for us to find faults in them. And obviously, one of the things I know is that it's easy to be polemic in that, to just watch someone's video and pick it apart. That actually is one of the more easy things to do. The harder thing to do is to pose a position. And a lot of people are out there who don't have a position, and they'll just literally come to say, if you say left, they say right. If you say black, they say white. I think we need to be clear from our position. Okay. And so that's why I've tried to focus very much on what our position is. And our position is that ancient Egyptians resembled modern Africans, and not only resembled them, but they were culturally, linguistically, craniometrically, anthropometrically, genetically, linguistically, even in the literature and the records, aligned with Africa. And that's easily provable. It just literally runs through every single vertical of the fabric of their existence. Everything can be aligned back to Africa. Everything can be found. Modern examples. Nothing about ancient Egyptian, including the language, is dead. Nothing about that culture is dead. It's all alive. We just need to continue searching through our understanding, continue searching through our knowledge of Africa and digging up and finding these links, because they are there and they're easy to find, but we just need to now start approaching from that perspective. It's very late. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me. I'm literally going to close the stream right now. So say your goodbyes. Have a fantastic evening. That was a very long stream. It wasn't supposed to be that long, but there you go. Had to be thorough. Hope you enjoyed it and hope it added some value. Have a fantastic evening, everyone, and I'll see you all on the next one. Peace.